She worked 3 feet from his office door for nearly 3 years. She knew his coffee order, his meeting schedule, his daughter's favorite color. And for nearly 3 years, he looked straight through her like she was part of the furniture. Then the lights went out. Trapped inside a freight elevator somewhere between the 27th and 28th floor, with no signal, no rescue, and nowhere to run, Ethan Holloway, one of the most powerful men in New York, finally had to look at her. Really look. What happened in those 7 hours would cost them both everything, and give them something neither one saw coming. If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one is going to take a while, and trust me, it's worth every minute. The morning always started the same way. Lily Bennett arrived at Holloway Group's Midtown Manhattan office at 7:45, 15 minutes before she was technically required to be there. Not because anyone told her to, not because she was trying to impress anyone. She did it because the elevator lines got brutal after 8, and she'd learned a long time ago that getting ahead of a problem was easier than fighting through the middle of one. She'd learned most of her survival skills that way, quietly, out of necessity, without anyone noticing. She hung her coat on the third hook in the east hallway closet, the one nobody else used because it was slightly warped and didn't close all the way. She kept a small lint roller in her desk drawer because the subway sometimes left her blazer looking like she'd wrestled a golden retriever. She kept 2 granola bars taped to the inside of her bottom drawer because there were days, more than she'd admit to anyone, when she couldn't afford both lunch and the copay on her mother's prescriptions. She kept a lot of things quiet. The Holloway Group occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower on 6th Avenue, and the executive floor, 32, was where Lily spent most of her day. Her official title was Executive Administrative Coordinator, which was a very long way of saying she was the person who made sure the 32nd floor didn't collapse into chaos whenever Ethan Holloway was too busy being a billionaire to remember that human beings required things like lunch and scheduled bathroom breaks. She'd been doing this job for 2 years and 9 months. In that time, she had reorganized his filing system 3 times because each new system he approved turned out to be something he hated within 6 weeks. She had learned to read his silences. The tight jaw that meant a meeting had gone badly, the particular way he rubbed the bridge of his nose when he was about to cancel something important. She had once talked down a vendor who was about to pull a $10 million contract because Ethan had forgotten to return a single phone call, and she'd done it without telling Ethan it happened at all, because the last thing that man needed was another item on a list of things to feel guilty about. She knew him. She knew him probably better than most people who had his personal cell number. And most mornings when she said, "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," as he stepped off the private elevator, he responded with something between a nod and a grunt and kept walking. That was their relationship, in its entirety. She used to wonder if it bothered her. She'd decided it didn't, or she'd decided to decide it didn't, which was close enough. The 32nd floor had a particular energy on Tuesday mornings. The standing leadership meeting started at 9, which meant everyone arrived already tightly wound, carrying tablets and coffee cups, and the specific facial expression of people who had rehearsed what they were going to say in the shower. Lily moved through it like water around rocks, stopping to confirm a conference room booking here, rerouting a catering delivery there, reminding Marcus Chen from legal that his 8:30 call had been moved to 8:15 and watching his face do something complicated. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Marcus asked. "I'm telling you now," Lily said pleasantly. "You have 12 minutes. He grabbed his folder and his coffee and jogged toward the conference room, and she turned back to her desk and crossed one item off the mental checklist she kept running in the back of her head at all times. It was the kind of work that was invisible when she did it right and catastrophic when she didn't. She'd made peace with that, too. At 8:50, the private elevator opened and Ethan Holloway walked onto the floor. He was tall. She'd always registered that, not in any particular way, just as a fact. 6'2", maybe 6'3", dark hair that he kept short and slightly disheveled in a way that probably cost him more money than her monthly grocery bill. He wore charcoal suits almost exclusively, and he moved through a room with the particular kind of stillness that very powerful people sometimes had. Not slow, not careful, just utterly certain that whatever space he occupied would arrange itself around him. He was 32 years old, and he had the eyes of someone considerably older. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway." Lily said from her desk as he passed. He glanced in her direction, the nod, the almost grunt. He kept walking. She pulled up his calendar on her screen and called after him, voice even. Board packet is on your desk. Your 9 o'clock is already in the conference room, and Sophie's school called about the fall performance schedule. I left the details in a separate note on top of the packet because I figured you'd want to deal with that separately. He stopped. He turned around just slightly, one hand on his office door. When's the performance? November 14th, Thursday, 7 p.m. A pause. Something moved across his face, brief, gone, before she could name it. Block it. Already done. He went into his office and closed the door, and Lily turned back to her screen. Sophie Holloway was 7 years old. She had her father's dark hair, and from what Lily had seen in the framed photo on Ethan's desk, her mother's eyes, pale green, wide-set, the kind of eyes that made people feel immediately trusted. Sophie had been 4 when her mother died. Lily didn't know the details. Nobody on the 32nd floor talked about it, at least not where anyone could hear them. What Lily knew was this. Ethan Holloway rearranged multi-million-dollar meetings without blinking, but he had never once missed a single school event for his daughter. Not one. That detail lived in a quiet corner of her mind, and she didn't examine it too closely. The morning churned forward the way Tuesday mornings did. The leadership meeting ran 7 minutes over because Victor Caldwell, the board's longest-standing member, had opinions about the quarterly projections that he was constitutionally incapable of expressing briefly. Lily had scheduled a 5-minute buffer specifically for this reason. She used the extra 2 minutes to confirm a lunch reservation and draft 3 emails that Ethan hadn't asked for yet, but would within the hour. Victor Caldwell was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had the self-assured manner of a man who had never once doubted that every room he entered had been waiting specifically for him. He smiled often and warmly. He was, in Lily's private assessment, one of the least trustworthy people she had ever met. And she'd grown up in a neighborhood where trust was a luxury most people couldn't afford. She didn't say that to anyone. She filed it away. At 12:30, Ethan's office door opened. "Bennett?" She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, holding the board packet in one hand with several pages dog-eared. He looked at her for a moment in a way that felt almost like he was trying to remember something. "The Meridian contract," he said. "There was a revision request that came in last week. Do you know where that is?" "Forwarded to legal on Thursday at 2:18 p.m. Marcus confirmed receipt. I can pull the email chain if you need it." A beat. "No." He looked down at the packet. "That's fine." He started to go back in, then stopped. "The school called?" "Yes, it was brief, just confirming the performance schedule for the fall semester. They also mentioned Sophie got the lead in the second act." The thing that crossed his face this time was different. She caught it, fast and unguarded, something that looked almost like pride stripped of every defense mechanism he usually ran. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. "Okay," he said. "Thanks." He went back in and closed the door. Lily stared at her screen for a moment. She typed 3 words in the small personal notes document she kept open on a corner of her desktop, a habit she'd started in her second month here, just small observations, nothing important, things she processed at the end of the day and then closed without saving. "He loves her," she typed. Then she deleted it and went back to work. Teach. The rain started around 3 in the afternoon. New York rain in late October had a particular personality. It didn't ease you in, didn't apologize, didn't build gradually. It just arrived, full and cold and completely indifferent to your plans. By 3:30, the streets below the tower were reflecting headlights in long orange smears, and the weather app on Lily's phone had upgraded its forecast from heavy rain to severe storm system with the small icon of a cloud that had a lightning bolt in it. She noted this the way she noted most things, practically, immediately, and with an eye toward what it would mean for logistics. Ethan had a dinner tonight, Laurent, on the Upper East Side, 7 p.m. She'd booked it herself, confirmed the reservation, arranged the car service. The car service was going to be a problem in this weather. She picked up her phone and called the driver before anyone asked her to. By 5 o'clock, the office had thinned out considerably. Rain had a way of accelerating the end of the workday, particularly on a Friday, and particularly when people had commutes waiting for them. The Holloway Group's 32nd floor, normally buzzing with controlled energy until at least 6:30, was down to a skeleton crew by 5:15. Lily stayed. She stayed because there were still 3 things on her list, and she didn't enjoy leaving things on her list. She also stayed because her apartment was a 40-minute subway ride to Queens, and stepping outside right now meant committing to the kind of soaking that was bad for suede boots and worse for dignity. She was on the phone with a vendor in Singapore. Time zone math was another thing she'd learned to do in her head. When the lights flickered, she didn't think much of it. Old building, big storm. She kept talking. Then the lights flickered again, longer this time, and every screen on the floor blinked out simultaneously. And then there was a sound she'd never heard before. A deep, building-wide exhale, like the tower itself had breathed out, and everything went dark. Not dim. Dark. The kind of dark that took a few seconds to process because your brain kept insisting that eyes adjusting to lower light wasn't the same thing as there being no light at all. "I'm going to have to call you back," she said into the phone. And then the phone told her she had 4% battery, and she said a word she didn't say in professional settings. The emergency lighting kicked in about 30 seconds later, pale and yellowish, running on backup power, casting the floor in the kind of light that made everything look slightly unreal. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city outside was a patchwork of dark and lit. Some buildings holding power, some not. The whole grid stuttering in the storm. "Great," said a voice from somewhere near the windows. She turned. Ethan Holloway was standing with his phone in his hand, looking out at the city, jacket back on, tie loosened. He'd apparently still been in his office this entire time. "The car is going to be completely useless," he said, not to her specifically. More to the situation. "I already called them," Lily said. "I told them to stand by, but not to come until I confirmed. Given the weather, I figured you might want flexibility on timing." He turned and looked at her. In the emergency lighting, his face was harder to read than usual. "Good call," he said. She stored that away somewhere too. Good call, 2 words. She was apparently collecting them. He looked back at his phone. "I have no signal." "I have 4% battery and the same problem," she said. "The Wi-Fi appears to be down. Backup generators usually don't run the network routers." He made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and an acknowledgement. "Is there anyone else still on the floor?" She did a quick mental inventory. "I don't think so. Jorge from facilities usually checks the floor around this time, but he was at the other tower today." She paused. "Security should know about the outage. There'll be someone at the lobby desk." Then we take the stairs to the lobby. "The emergency stairwell is on the north side. I know where the stairs are." Of course he did. They went to the north stairwell together, which was not a sentence Lily had ever expected to form about this job. The stairwell door opened fine. Manual mechanism, not reliant on the building's electrical system. And they started down. Emergency lighting here too, even dimmer, the kind of illumination that said you won't die rather than you can see clearly. They made it 4 floors before they hit the problem. The door to 28 wouldn't open. Ethan tried it twice. Lily tried it once. It wasn't jammed. It was locked. Magnetic lock systems, she realized. Certain floors used them as a security measure. Without power to the release mechanism, the door defaulted to locked. "The freight elevator," Ethan said. "The freight elevator runs on separate power circuit, I know. The building spec put the freight elevator on a dedicated emergency circuit. It should still be operational." She looked at him. "You know the building spec?" "I own the building." Right. She sometimes forgot that part, in the same way you sometimes forgot the ocean was there, even when you were standing next to it. The freight elevator was on the far side of the floor, accessible from the stairwell through a secondary corridor. They found it without difficulty. The doors opened when Ethan pressed the call button. The interior was smaller than she'd expected. Functional, industrial, with metal walls and a single fluorescent strip light running on what she assumed was the emergency circuit. There was a fold-down bench along one wall, a fire extinguisher in the corner, a panel of buttons that looked like it hadn't been updated since approximately 1994. They stepped in. Ethan pressed the lobby button. Letter G, old-fashioned, slightly sticky. The doors closed. The elevator moved. It moved for about 45 seconds, smooth enough. And then something happened that Lily would later describe to her friend Dara as the worst mechanical sound she had ever heard in her life. A grinding, shuddering protest from somewhere in the shaft above them. And the elevator stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Complete and immediate, as though the decision had been made all at once. The emergency lighting flickered. Held. A long silence. "We're stuck," Lily said. "Yes," said Ethan. "Between floors." "Yes." Another silence. "The emergency phone." She pointed to a small panel near the buttons. He was already opening it. He picked up the handset, listened, put it back. "Line's working. I called down. Security knows. They're contacting the elevator maintenance company." He paused. "The technician is 40 minutes out." 40 minutes. She looked at the metal walls, the dim strip light, the fold-down bench. She calculated the square footage. She estimated it at maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, give or take. "Okay," she said. Ethan took off his jacket and folded it over his arm. He sat down on the fold-down bench. He looked at the floor. Lily stood for a moment, and then, with a quiet lack of ceremony, she sat down on the bench too, a careful distance away from him, far enough that this didn't feel strange, close enough that they could talk at a normal volume. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that had weight to it. Ethan spoke first. "You've been here almost 3 years." She looked at him. 2 years and 9 months. "Before that?" She paused. "Executive assistant at a law firm downtown. Before that, a nonprofit in the Bronx." She kept her voice even, the way she always did when she was saying things she hadn't been asked to say before. "Before that, various things. I put myself through school while working. It took a while." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you study?" This one surprised her. "English literature and journalism, double major." A beat. "I know." Very practical. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly. More like the shape a smile might occupy if it decided to stay brief. "No, I—" He stopped, started again. "What do you do with it?" "Officially? I write when I have time, which isn't as often as I'd like." She paused. "I have a project. Something longer. I work on it in the evening sometimes." "What kind of project?" She looked at him directly for the first time and she tried to remember. It was hard to pinpoint. Most of their interactions happened with the desk between them, or with him in motion and her stationary. Looking at him like this, in a metal box with nowhere to look away, felt different. He had the kind of face that took a minute to read. Not handsome in any easy way. Something more complicated than that. "It's fiction," she said. "It's about people who have very little and the mechanisms they build to survive that. The invisible architecture of being broke." She paused. "I realize that sounds like a difficult sell. Does it matter if it sells?" She blinked. "I mean, eventually, practically speaking, but not right now." "No," she said after a moment. "Not right now." He looked at the floor again. The elevator made a small sound somewhere in its mechanics, settling or protesting, it was hard to tell. The light in the strip above them was slightly yellow and made everything look a little older than it was. "I'm sorry," he said abruptly. She looked at him. "For what?" He had the expression of a man who had started a sentence before he'd finished deciding to say it. He worked with it. "I've worked with you for 3 years, and I don't—" He stopped. "I knew you were good at your job. I knew that clearly. I've mentioned it to other people." A slight tension in his jaw. "I'm not sure I've said it to you directly." Lily was quiet for a moment. "You haven't," she said, not unkindly, just factually. She'd developed a talent for delivering difficult truths in a tone that made them sound like observations rather than accusations. It was another survival skill. He nodded slowly, like he'd known the answer and asked anyway. "No, I know. Can I ask you something?" He looked at her. "Yes." "Why?" A pause. "Why what? Why is it like that?" She kept her voice steady. She hadn't planned to ask this. She also hadn't planned to be trapped in a freight elevator between floors 27 and 28 on a Friday night in a storm, so apparently the evening was full of surprises. I'm not asking to make you uncomfortable. I'm asking because I've spent 2 years and 9 months not understanding it, and right now we literally have nowhere to be. Ethan was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that isn't evasion, the kind that's excavation. I'm not good at... He stopped. Tried again. After Claire died, I stopped being good at... Another stop. He pressed the heel of his hand to his knee, a small gesture of frustration with himself. I don't know how to talk about it without sounding like I'm making excuses. Claire. She'd never heard him say the name before. She held very still, the way you did when something important was deciding whether or not to continue. I'm not looking for excuses, she said. I'm just looking for the reason. He exhaled slowly. I started thinking of people as roles, functions, not on purpose. It just happened over time. The grief, the company, Sophie. Everything needed managing. I got very good at managing things. He paused. People included. Lily thought about that. That's lonely, she said. It came out more directly than she'd intended, but it had the quality of true things. It landed without fuss and sat there. He looked at her, and this time he held the eye contact, which he had never done. Not in 2 years and 9 months of good mornings and dog-eared board packets and blocked November 14th. Yes, he said, it is. The elevator made another sound in the shaft above them. Outside, somewhere beyond the metal walls and the stopped machinery and 40 feet of air, New York carried on in the dark. Horns and rain, and the particular chaos of a city that didn't know how to pause. Lily thought about her mother in their apartment in Queens, probably fine, probably watching something on her tablet with the sound too high the way she always did. She thought about the granola bar in her desk drawer. She thought about the chapter she'd been trying to finish for 6 weeks. Can I ask you something now? Ethan said. Sure. The day the Meridian contract almost fell through, the vendor, Kasner Distribution. I never found out what actually happened. She looked at him. Marcus told me there was a miscommunication and it got smoothed over, he continued, but Marcus looked like he was repeating something someone else had told him to say. A pause. He was. You handled it. I made a phone call. And didn't tell me. She considered her answer. You had a lot going on that week. It would have been another thing on a list that was already too long. I handled it. It was resolved. The contract stayed. I didn't see what telling you would have accomplished except giving you something else to worry about retroactively. He was quiet for a moment. You were protecting me. I was doing my job. No. He shook his head slightly. I know what doing a job looks like. That was something else. She didn't have an answer for that, so she didn't offer one. The strip light above them flickered briefly and held again. What was it like? He asked. Growing up the way you described. She took a breath. This was different territory. More personal, less professional. The elevator wasn't getting any bigger. Tight, she said finally. Not dramatic. There were dramatic moments, but mostly it was just tight. Every month was a calculation. Can we cover rent and groceries, or do we prioritize one? Does the car get fixed, or does the electric bill get paid? My mom worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, and she still sometimes had to ask her sister for help. She looked at her hands. You get good at not needing things, or convincing yourself you don't. That's why you keep granola bars in your desk. She looked at him sharply. His expression was neutral. I've seen them. I'm observant. I'm just not... I understand now that I'm not always communicative about what I observe. That's a diplomatic way to put it. It's accurate. She almost laughed. It came out as something small and involuntary, a single exhale with something warm in it. She caught it and pressed her mouth together. He didn't smile, but something around his eyes changed slightly. The granola bars, she said, after a moment, are a habit. From a time when I genuinely needed them. I don't necessarily need them now, but I don't feel safe without them. She paused. That probably sounds irrational. No, he said immediately. It sounds like something that makes complete sense. She looked at him. You don't have to... I'm not being polite. His voice was even. I'm being honest, which I'm told I'm also not especially communicative about. This time she did laugh. Quiet, a little surprised at herself. and something in the metal box shifted. Some quality of the air between them, some arrangement that had held for 2 years and 9 months, and had been predicated on distance and role, and the particular fiction that these two people occupied entirely separate worlds. It didn't disappear, exactly, but it developed a crack. They talked. They talked in the way that people do when circumstances remove the option of not talking. Not always comfortably, not always without pause, but continuously, with the quality of two people discovering that they have more to say to each other than either one expected. He told her about Sophie, not the official version, not the proud executive talking about his daughter, but the real version. The part where Sophie woke up from nightmares twice a week, and the only thing that worked was lying next to her until she fell back asleep, even when he had a 6 a.m. call. The part where Sophie had her mother's habit of going completely silent when she was upset, which was terrifying in a 7-year-old because you couldn't reach her, you just had to wait. The part where he had been to 3 different therapists in the past 4 years, not because he believed in it precisely, but because Sophie's pediatrician had told him that children absorb parental grief and process it as their own. And he had decided that whatever it cost him, Sophie was not going to pay for his grief. She told him about her mother, the way her mother still apologized, even now, for things that weren't her fault, for the tight years, for the borrowed money, for the secondhand winter coat when Lily was 12. The way Lily had never been able to convince her that none of it required apology. The way her mother made arroz con pollo that was the best thing Lily had ever tasted, in any restaurant, at any price point, and the way that dish existed for Lily as a kind of landmark. Whenever she was homesick, even in her own city, she'd think about that smell from the kitchen and feel slightly less untethered. Ethan was quiet after that. "I haven't cooked in 2 years," he said. "We have someone who comes in." "That's practical. Sophie asked me last month if I could make pancakes for her birthday breakfast. Just regular pancakes." A pause. "I burned the first 2 batches. And? The 3rd batch was edible. She told me they were delicious. She was being generous. She's 7. She was being diplomatic." Something crossed his face, complicated and fond. "She's going to be terrifying when she grows up." Lily smiled without thinking about it. "She sounds like it." The maintenance call came through on the emergency phone at 9:47 p.m. By that point, they'd been in the elevator for nearly 2 hours. The technician was apologetic about the delay, flooding on the BQE, alternate routes, the storm. He walked them through what was happening. A mechanical issue with the emergency brake that the power outage had triggered. It would take approximately another hour to resolve safely. Another hour. Ethan relayed the information to Lily, and there was a moment where they both registered it. 1 more hour, this small metal box, the emergency lighting, the rain somewhere beyond all of it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. And they kept talking. At some point, she couldn't have said exactly when, she started talking about the book, the real version of it, not the polished 30-second explanation she gave when people asked. The actual thing she was trying to write, which was about her grandmother and the neighborhood in the Bronx where her mother grew up, and the way poverty had a texture and a sound and a particular smell of cooking and damp concrete and other people's cigarettes, and how she wanted to write it in a way that felt like standing inside that world rather than observing it from outside. He listened, not politely, actually listened, the way you could tell someone was listening because they asked questions that came from what you'd just said, not questions they'd prepared. "Why do you think it's taking so long?" he asked. "The writing." She thought about it. "Because I'm afraid of it," she said. "I'm afraid if I write it wrong, it'll feel like I've done something wrong to the people it's about. Like I'll have turned their lives into something smaller than they were by putting words on it. And if you write it right?" A pause. She hadn't thought about that part as much. "Then maybe someone who doesn't know that world will know it a little. And maybe someone who does know it will feel a little less like it's invisible." He was quiet for a long moment. "Write it," he said. Just that. She looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a point on the metal wall, slightly unfocused, like he was thinking about something else at the same time. "That's not helpful advice, specifically," she said. "No, but it's correct." She thought about arguing. She didn't. The elevator started moving at 11:12. It descended the remaining distance to the lobby in about 30 seconds, smooth and completely unremarkable, as though it hadn't just held two people suspended between floors for close to 3 hours. The doors opened. The lobby was lit by emergency generators, bright and slightly harsh after the dim box they'd been in. There were two security guards, both visibly relieved. The maintenance technician, rain-soaked, was standing to the side with a tablet and an apologetic expression. And standing near the revolving doors sheltered from the rain were two men Lily didn't immediately recognize, and one of them had a camera. She registered it a half second before Ethan did. The flash. The angle. The practiced quickness of a person who knew they had a small window. Then they were through the revolving doors and into the rain, and the car service, which Lily had, without power or signal, somehow never managed to cancel, was outside waiting, and the moment was over before she'd fully processed it had happened. In the car, water dripping from her hair onto her collar, she sat beside Ethan Holloway in the back seat, and they were both quiet for a long moment. "The driver can drop you first," he said. "Queens, right?" She looked at him. She had never told him she lived in Queens. He met her gaze. "I signed the HR paperwork." "Right," she said. The car moved through wet streets, and the storm was beginning to ease, and somewhere behind them the tower was dark, and somewhere two men were looking at a photograph, and none of that had happened yet in any way that mattered. For now there was just the rain on the windows and the lights of the city smearing past, and the particular silence of two people who had told each other something true and didn't yet know what to do with it. The photograph ran on a Saturday. Lily found out about it the way she found out about most things that happened outside her control, through someone else's reaction to it first. Her friend Dara called at 7:43 in the morning, which was how Lily knew before she even picked up that something had gone sideways, because Dara did not call before 9 on weekends. It was a personal policy Dara had articulated clearly and defended aggressively for the entirety of their 12-year friendship. "Don't panic," Dara said, which was the single most effective way to cause panic in another person. Lily sat up in bed. "What?" "There's a photo of you and your boss coming out of the building last night." A pause. "Send it to me." "It's not bad. I mean, aesthetically. You look a little wet, but it's not." "Dara?" "Sending." The photo arrived and Lily looked at it for a long moment. It was taken from the street level, through the revolving door and then immediately outside it. A tight angle, the kind that required someone to be specifically positioned and waiting. It showed Ethan first, jacket on, hand on the door, and then Lily a step behind him, her hair damp from the walk to the car, her coat buttoned wrong because she'd grabbed it in a hurry in the dark. They weren't touching. They weren't even particularly close. But the camera had caught a specific moment, the moment when Ethan had turned slightly back toward her, and she had looked up at him, and whatever expression was on both their faces was the kind that didn't belong to a boss and his employee at the end of a normal workday. That was the problem. Not what they were doing, what they looked like they were feeling. The caption under it, on a financial gossip site that Lily had never heard of, but apparently half of New York's business community read religiously, said, "Holloway Group CEO Ethan Holloway and unidentified female companion exit Midtown Tower during Friday's blackout. Dinner plans or something more?" Unidentified female companion. She put the phone face down on the mattress and stared at the ceiling. "Lily?" Dara's voice, tinny through the speaker. "I'm here." "Are you okay?" "I'm processing." "Okay, but while you process, is there something to tell me? Because that photo has a vibe." "We were trapped in a freight elevator for 3 hours during the blackout. When it finally got fixed, we walked out. Someone was there with a camera." A pause on Dara's end. "Trapped. In an elevator. For 3 hours. Just the two of you." "Yes. And nothing happened." "We talked." "About?" "Various things." "Lily?" "I'm serious. We talked. That's it." She picked the phone back up and looked at the photo again. The expression on her own face was the thing that bothered her most. She hadn't known she'd looked like that. Open, somehow. Less guarded than she thought she'd been. "It's fine. It's a gossip site. Nobody important reads it." This turned out to be wrong. By Sunday afternoon, the story had migrated from the gossip site to 3 financial industry publications, and the framing had shifted. It was no longer speculative. It was a story. And the story had acquired a particular shape: the billionaire CEO and the employee, the power imbalance, the questions it raised about professional conduct and judgment. One piece used the word distraction. Another used the phrase sources close to the board without naming anyone. Sources close to the board. Lily read that twice. She knew, with the particular instinct she'd developed from years of watching rooms and reading the silences in them, exactly whose sources those were. She thought about Victor Caldwell and his warm smile and his opinions about quarterly projections. She thought about the way he'd looked at Ethan in Tuesday's meeting, attentive, collegial, with something underneath it that she'd filed away and not examined too closely. She examined it now. She spent Sunday afternoon on her laptop, reading things. Financial news archives going back 4 years. Board meeting minutes, which were public record for a company Holloway Group's size. A profile of Victor Caldwell in a business magazine from 18 months ago that described him as a steadying hand on the wheel of one of New York's most dynamic companies. She read that sentence 3 times. It felt like it had been written to mean something else. She didn't know what she was looking for, exactly. She knew she'd recognize it when she found it. She didn't find it that afternoon, but she opened a folder on her desktop and started dropping files into it. Old habit. From a time in her life when the only resource she had was information, and she'd learned to collect it carefully and keep it organized. She went to bed at midnight and lay awake for a while, listening to the rain that had finally gentled to something quieter, and thought about the look on Ethan's face when she'd told him the granola bars were a habit from a harder time, the way he hadn't done anything performative with that information, hadn't offered sympathy or pivoted to something more comfortable, had just said, "That makes complete sense." She thought about that more than she should have. Monday arrived the way Mondays did, without sympathy and slightly ahead of schedule. Lily got to the office at 7:30 instead of 7:45. She told herself it was because she had extra things to get done. She was mostly lying to herself and she knew it, but she was in a hurry, so she let it go. The 32nd floor had a different quality when she walked in. She'd spent enough time in rooms to know when a room had been talking before you arrived. It was in the micro adjustments, the conversations that lowered half a register as you passed, the eye contact that lasted 1 second too long, the particular studied casualness of people who were pretending they hadn't just been discussing you. She went to her desk, turned on her computer, and started working. At 8:15, her desk phone rang. Internal line. "Bennett?" She answered it the way she always did. "My office." Ethan's voice. "Now, please." The please was new. She noted it. She walked to his office and knocked once and opened the door. He was standing at his window with his back to her, hands in his pockets, looking at the city. He'd been here early, too, she could tell. His coffee cup was already half empty, and he'd moved the stack of papers on his desk from the position she'd left them Friday to a different arrangement, which meant he'd been sitting there actually working for a while before he started looking out the window. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Have you seen it?" Not a question. "Yes," she said. Both versions. The initial piece on Friday night and the follow-up yesterday. He turned around. He looked tired in a specific way. Not sleep-deprived, but weighed down. The kind of tired that came from spending the weekend carrying something heavy in your head and not putting it down. "I need to know if you're okay." She looked at him. "I'm fine." "Lily." He said her first name for what she was fairly certain was the first time in 2 years and 9 months, and it landed with a small, unexpected weight. "That piece used your photo. They've identified you by now, even if they didn't print the name. This office has 40 employees, and none of them are going to stay quiet." "I know. It's not acceptable." "I know that too." She kept her voice even. "What are you planning to do about it?" He moved to his desk and sat down heavily, like the answer to that question was something he'd been working on all weekend and hadn't fully resolved. "I have the communications team putting together a response. Nothing that confirms or inflates the story, just a clean factual statement. 2 employees were caught in the building during the blackout. We exited together when the elevator was repaired." End of story. That's accurate. Yes. He paused. The board meeting is Wednesday. She had it in his calendar. Quarterly review, 2 hours. Victor Caldwell presiding over the agenda because the bylaws gave him that role as senior independent director. She'd booked the room herself. I know. Victor called me Saturday morning. Something in Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He expressed concern, very warmly, at length. A pause. He used the word optics 4 times. Did he? He also mentioned that this wasn't the ideal time for distractions, given the ongoing Meridian expansion discussions. Ethan looked at her steadily. He knows about Meridian. That's not public. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, the one she'd sat in dozens of times to take notes or run through logistics. Right now it felt different. He's on the board. The Meridian discussions are in a pre-disclosure stage. They haven't been presented to the full board yet. Only myself and 2 legal advisors have the full picture. He stopped. And Caldwell, apparently. The folder she'd started on her desktop on Sunday felt suddenly relevant. That's a problem, she said. Yes. She hesitated for a moment, then decided. I started pulling information on Sunday about Caldwell. Nothing specific. I didn't know what I was looking for. But I noticed something in the Q3 board minutes from last year. A vote on the Kessler acquisition. The public record shows it went 7-2 against. But the internal summary I processed for your files, I remember it differently. I remember it was 6-3. Ethan was very still. I could be wrong, she said. I'd need to check against the original document. Where's the original? Filed, I can find it. She paused. If someone altered the public record, that's not a small thing. No, he said. It's not. He looked at her for a long moment. Pull it, quietly. Don't tell anyone what you're looking for. Obviously. A silence. And then unexpectedly something shifted in his expression. The professional layer thinned for a moment, the same way it had in the elevator when they'd been talking about pancakes and grief and arroz con pollo. I owe you an apology, he said. For the photo. For the situation. You didn't take it. I know, but you're dealing with the fallout of something that happened because you were doing your job, and the fact that it happened at all. He stopped, pressed his mouth together briefly. You shouldn't have to be managing this. She looked at him and thought about the granola bars in her drawer and the manuscript she hadn't touched in 6 weeks and the prescription her mother needed by Thursday. She thought about 3 years of good mornings and nods and almost grunts. I've managed harder things, she said. Not bitterly, just true. He held her gaze. I know you have. She got up and went back to her desk and found the document she was looking for within 20 minutes because she knew the filing system inside out. Every version, every reorganization, every folder. She pulled the original internal summary from October of last year, cross-referenced it with the public board minutes, and sat back in her chair. 6-3. Just as she'd remembered. The public record said 7-2. Someone had changed it, and whoever had done it hadn't counted on a 30-year-old woman in Queens who'd grown up learning to hang on to information like it was currency. She made 2 copies. One she sent to Ethan's internal encrypted email with a note that said simply, found it, see attached, original versus public record. The other she saved to a personal drive she kept at home and did not bring into the office. Old habit, she went back to work. The morning churned forward and the 32nd floor did its thing. Meetings and phone calls and deliveries and the ordinary machinery of a company that generated, on a slow day, more decisions per hour than most people made in a month. Lily moved through it the same way she always had, doing her job, watching the room. But the room was watching back now. She felt it most acutely around 11 when she was refilling her coffee in the small kitchen and ran into Derek Paulson from Investor Relations. Derek was 35 and professionally amiable in the way that people sometimes were when they were deciding whether you were useful to them. He smiled at her with extra warmth, poured his own coffee, and said, "Quite a Friday night, huh?" "Power outages aren't exactly exciting," she said. "No, of course." He stirred his coffee. "Must have been something, though, being stuck with Holloway for hours. He's not exactly easy company." She looked at Derek. She thought about several things she could say and selected none of them. "He was fine," she said. "Excuse me." In the elevator on the way back to her desk, she pressed the button for 32 and stood with her coffee and thought about what fine meant as a descriptor for what had happened in that freight elevator, and almost laughed at herself. At 12:40, the photo got bigger. One of the financial publications, the largest one, the one that the entire industry actually read, ran a proper piece. Not gossip. Framed analysis. It cited unnamed board sources who expressed concern about Holloway Group's leadership stability. It raised questions about Ethan's judgment. It mentioned the Meridian expansion, which was supposed to be pre-disclosure, which meant someone had talked. Lily read it at her desk and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She forwarded it to Ethan's email and typed, "Meridian is in here." The source had to have board-level access. His reply came back in 4 minutes. "I know, stay close to the floor today." She stayed close. At 2 o'clock, Victor Caldwell arrived on the 32nd floor. He wasn't scheduled. She knew the calendar the way she knew her own name. Nothing had been booked. Nothing had been called in. He simply appeared, silver-haired and well-tailored, with a smile that arrived about a half-second faster than it should have, the way smiles did when they were being deployed rather than felt. "Lily," he said, as if they were old friends, as if he'd ever spoken to her before in a way that wasn't functional. "Is Ethan available?" "He's in a call," she said. "I can let him know you're here." "Please." She called through. Ethan came out of his office 2 minutes later, and something happened in the air between the two men. A very particular rearrangement, like two people who had been playing chess and had just looked up from the board and acknowledged the other person's presence for the first time. "Victor," Ethan said. His voice was neutral in the specific way it was neutral when he was paying very close attention. "I thought we should talk before Wednesday," Caldwell said pleasantly. "Is now a good time?" "Of course. Come in." They went into the office. The door closed. Lily sat at her desk and did not obviously try to hear anything, which was easy because she genuinely couldn't through a closed solid core door. What she could do, what she had been doing, quietly, for the past several hours, was think. She thought about the altered board minutes. She thought about the way the financial piece this morning had known details that shouldn't have been in circulation. She thought about the photo and who would have been positioned to know that Ethan and Lily were still in the building on Friday night and would be leaving through the lobby when the elevator was finally repaired. Someone on the building's security team would have known, the maintenance tech, or someone who had access to the building's internal systems, or someone who had been watching. She pulled up the building's visitor log for Friday. She had access because managing executive floor logistics sometimes required it. She scrolled through the afternoon entries. Most were routine, but at 4:47 p.m., 20 minutes before the blackout, a visitor had badged in on the ground floor. Guest badge, escorted by building security. No company affiliation listed. Name, R. Malone. R. Malone had not badged out until 11:58 p.m., 1 hour after Lily and Ethan had left the building. She looked at that entry for a long time. Then she copied it to the folder on her personal drive. Victor Caldwell left Ethan's office at 2:40. He passed Lily's desk and smiled at her the same warm way and said, "Have a good afternoon." And she said, "You too," and watched him step into the elevator. Ethan appeared in his doorway 30 seconds later. He looked at her with an expression that was flat and controlled, and she'd learned by now that flatness and control in his face was what happened when something had gotten genuinely under his skin. "Find out everything you can about Victor's ownership positions in the companies we're competing with for the Meridian contracts," he said. Discreetly. As always, she was already reaching for her keyboard. "Anything else?" He was quiet for a second. "The Kessler vote from October, the original internal summary. Is it somewhere safe?" "2 copies," she said. "One on your encrypted server. One somewhere he can't get to." Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the particular expression of a person who had been half expecting the ground to shift and was glad to find it hadn't. "Good," he said. Then, "Thank you, Lily." Again the name. She was going to have to get used to that, apparently. "Go take your call," she said. "I've got this." He went back into his office, and she started digging. By the time 4 o'clock came around, she had assembled the beginning of something that felt significant. Victor Caldwell had, through a layered series of holding companies, ownership positions in two of the three main competitors bidding against Holloway Group for the Meridian distribution contract. The structure was complicated enough that it wasn't immediately obvious, the kind of thing that required patience and the willingness to follow a chain of entities through multiple filings. But it was there. She also found, in a public regulatory database, a complaint from 6 years ago, before Victor had joined the Holloway board, involving a different company, a similar allegation of insider positioning. The complaint had been dismissed for insufficient evidence, but it had been filed. Pattern. She knew what patterns looked like. She organized everything she had into a clean document, clearly sourced, nothing speculative. Facts in their documentation, laid out in the order she'd found them. She sent it to Ethan's encrypted email with the subject line, "Read before Wednesday." Then she sat back and let out a long, slow breath. She hadn't eaten since the granola bar at 10. She opened her drawer and took out the second one and sat there eating it at her desk, watching the light change outside the windows as the afternoon moved toward evening. The 32nd floor had thinned again. People heading home or to dinner or wherever people went at the end of a Monday that had been heavier than Mondays were supposed to be. Her desk phone rang at 4:30. She picked it up. "Bennett." "It's me." "Ethan. I'm looking at what you sent." "Okay." A pause. "How long did this take you?" "A few hours." "Where did you find the Caldwell regulatory complaint?" "Public database. It's not hidden. It's just not easy to find unless you're looking for it specifically and you know how to navigate the filings." Another pause. Longer. "Lily." "Yes. I need you to understand what this is. If this is accurate, I didn't send you anything I couldn't document," she said. "Every item has a source citation. Nothing is extrapolated." "I know." He paused again. She could hear him moving in his office. Chair, papers. "I'm calling legal tonight. I want you on that call." She sat up slightly. That was different. She took notes on calls. She didn't usually participate in them. "All right. 7 o'clock. I'll send the dial in. I'll be here. You don't have to stay late again." "I'll be here," she said. The line was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been asking me things. I don't seem to be stopping you." Something in his voice changed, the professional layer thinning the same way it had in the elevator. "That night, what we talked about, the writing, your mother, all of it." A pause. "Do you regret saying any of it?" She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think. "No," she said. "Do you?" "No," quick and certain. "I don't." She leaned back in her chair and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the afternoon light going golden and sideways across the buildings. Her mother would be home by now, probably starting dinner, the television on in the background for company. "Good," she said. "Just that. The legal call happened at 7, with 2 senior partners from outside counsel, and Lily sat in the small conference room with her laptop open and her document pulled up, answering questions when they were directed at her and taking meticulous notes when they weren't. The lawyers were sharp and moved fast, and by 8:15 they had outlined a preliminary strategy for Wednesday that Ethan would need to refine and Lily would need to organize supporting documents for. When the call ended, Ethan appeared in the conference room doorway. He was in his shirt sleeves again, jacket somewhere, and he looked less weighed down than he had this morning, which she took as a reasonable sign. "You were good on that call," he said. "I was accurate on that call. That's different." "Not from where I was sitting." She saved her document and closed the laptop. "I'll have the supporting packet ready for you by tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. if you want to review before the day starts." 7 is fine. He paused. "Have you eaten?" She thought about the granola bar. "Approximately. There's food. The delivery I ordered at 6. It's still in my office if you want." He said it with the particular careful casualness of someone who wasn't sure how the offer would be received and was trying not to make it a big thing. She thought about the 40-minute subway to Queens and her mother's arroz con pollo and the chapter she hadn't touched in 6 weeks. "Okay," she said, "for a few minutes." They sat in his office with containers from a Thai place on 51st Street and talked about the legal strategy mostly, and then about other things. The way conversations between two people do when the professional scaffolding is there, but it's late and the floor is empty and the city is doing its nighttime thing outside the windows. He told her Sophie had asked that morning why he'd come home so late on Friday. "What did you tell her?" Lily asked. "The truth, that I'd gotten stuck at work." A pause. She asked if I'd been scared. "Had you?" He considered it. "No." Another pause. "That's probably the most honest answer I've given about Friday." She looked at him across the takeout containers and thought about the photo. The one that had started all of this. The one that had captured whatever was on their faces when they'd walked out of that building. She thought about what a camera couldn't capture. 3 hours of two people deciding to be honest with each other in a 6x8 metal box. "She sounds like a perceptive kid," Lily said, terrifyingly so. He said it the same way he'd said it in the elevator, complicated and fond. She finished her food and stood up and put on her coat. He walked her to the elevator, the main one, the regular one, and pressed the button for her, and they stood in the hallway for a moment with the ordinary awkwardness of two people at the end of an evening that hadn't quite been a regular work evening and wasn't quite anything else either. "Wednesday's going to be difficult," he said. "I know. I want you to know, whatever happens in that boardroom, what you've done in the last 2 days is not nothing. It's not anywhere close to nothing." She looked at him, dead. He was looking back at her with that same directness she'd first registered in the elevator, the kind that happened when the professional layer was down and there was nothing between the expression and the person having it. "I know it's not," she said. Not immodestly, just accurately, something almost like a smile. "Good." The elevator arrived. She stepped in. As the doors were closing, she heard him say quietly, more to himself than to her, 7 a.m. 7 a.m., she confirmed. The doors closed and she rode down alone, and somewhere above her the 32nd floor settled into the kind of quiet that big offices had at night. The hum of servers, the distant city, the accumulated weight of everything that had happened in a room and hadn't quite finished happening yet. She got on the subway to Queens. She opened a new document on her phone and wrote 3 sentences of her book, the opening of a chapter she'd been trying to find for weeks. The words came out different than she'd expected, cleaner, more direct. She didn't delete them. The supporting packet was on Ethan's desk at 6:58 a.m. Lily had been at the office since 6:15. She hadn't slept particularly well, not from anxiety exactly, more from the particular restlessness that came when her brain decided that 2 a.m. was an excellent time to keep running through documents and implications, and the specific look on Victor Caldwell's face when he'd said, "Have a good afternoon" on his way out of the building. She'd given up on sleep at 5, made coffee in her mother's kitchen, and taken the first subway of the morning into the city while the streets were still half dark and mostly empty. The packet was 41 pages. She knew because she'd assembled every one of them: the board minutes discrepancy, the regulatory complaint, the ownership documentation on Caldwell's holding companies, the timeline of events from Friday through Monday, cross-referenced with the media publications and their sourcing patterns. She'd had it organized, indexed, and printed on the office's secure printer before most of the building's cleaning crew had finished their rounds. She put it on his desk with a single post-it on the cover. "Read the executive summary first, then pages 12 to 19. Call me if you have questions before you read the rest." Then she went to her desk and drank her coffee and waited. Ethan arrived at 7:20. He was moving faster than usual, the particular pace of someone who had things to do and had already been doing them in his head for hours. He stopped at her desk for a fraction of a second. "It's on your desk," she said. "Executive summary first." He nodded and kept moving. She heard his office door close. She started on her own morning tasks, the routine ones, the calendar confirmations, the email triage, and worked steadily while in the back of her head she kept a quiet count of how long it was taking him to read. He came out at 8:05. He stood in the doorway of his office and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Something that existed in the space between those two things, where a person went when they understood clearly what they were dealing with and were deciding how to deal with it. The holding companies, he said. Caldwell is third-level beneficial owner on 2 of those entities. How did you find that? SEC beneficial ownership disclosures require third-level reporting for positions above 5%. Most people don't read to that level because the filings are structured to be difficult to cross-reference. I cross-referenced them in one afternoon. I'm a fast reader. He stepped out of his doorway and came to her desk and stood there, which he almost never did. He moved through the floor, but he didn't tend to stop. Stopping at her desk felt like a deliberate choice, the kind of thing a person did when they wanted to make it clear they were paying attention. Pages 12 through 19, he said. The voting record analysis. That's not just a discrepancy in the Kessler vote. There are 3 others. 4 if you count the Prescott advisory opinion from last March. That one's subtler. It's a language change rather than a numerical change. The word abstain was replaced with approve in the public record. He was quiet for a moment. That changes the outcome of that vote. Yes. Lily. His voice was careful. Do you understand what this document is? She looked at him evenly. It's documentation of systematic falsification of board records to misrepresent voting outcomes in a way that benefited a board member with undisclosed conflicts of interest. Yes, I understand what it is. He leaned one hand on the edge of her desk, not in an aggressive way, more the way a person did when they needed something solid for a moment. If this is brought forward correctly, it doesn't just end Caldwell's position on the board, he said. It opens a criminal investigation. I know. And it means he's been doing this for at least 4 years. At least, she said. I only went back to the Kessler acquisition because that's where I started. I didn't have time to go further. He looked at her for a long moment. What's on your drive at home? She met his gaze. The same thing that's in your packet plus the visitor log entry for R. Malone. I kept copies separate from anything connected to this building's systems. In case. In case. In case something happened to the originals. He straightened up. Something moved across his face. Complicated, layered, the kind of expression that contained more than one thing at once. You thought ahead. Significantly ahead. I grew up in a situation where if you didn't think ahead, things disappeared, she said simply. Documents, money, options. You learn. He held her gaze for another moment, and then he said something she wasn't expecting. I should have been paying better attention for 3 years. Not to the documents, not to the board, to her. The sentence landed quietly, and she let it sit there. You're paying attention now, she said. That's more useful. He went back into his office, and she heard him on the phone within 60 seconds. Outside counsel. The call lasted 40 minutes, and when it ended, there were 2 more. And by the time the 32nd floor had filled up to its usual Tuesday population, the machinery of something much larger than a boardroom dispute had started moving. The day had a different texture than Monday. Monday had been reactive at managing the fallout, building the picture. Tuesday was something else. It was the day before Wednesday, and everyone on the 32nd floor could feel it without being able to name it, the way animals felt weather changes. People moved slightly differently, spoke slightly more quietly. The leadership team had a closed-door session at 10 that Lily had not been asked to take minutes on, which was itself information. Victor Caldwell did not appear. At 11:30, Ethan's assistant, Lily, received a call from Caldwell's personal secretary, a woman named Helen, who had the clipped efficiency of someone who had been managing powerful people's schedules for decades. Mr. Caldwell would like to confirm his attendance at tomorrow's board meeting, Helen said. Of course, Lily said. He's on the confirmed list. He'd also like to circulate an additional agenda item. He's sending it through now. I'll make sure Mr. Holloway receives it. The email arrived 30 seconds later. The additional agenda item was titled Review of Executive Leadership Standards and Recent Conduct Concerns. It was 3 paragraphs, and it named Ethan by title, and it cited the media coverage from the weekend, and it used the word distraction twice and the phrase questions of judgment once. It was precise and professional, and it was designed to walk into that boardroom like a grenade with a very long pin. Lily read it once, forwarded it to Ethan's encrypted email, printed 1 copy for the packet, and filed it in the folder on her personal drive. She did not allow herself to feel anything about it for approximately 4 minutes, which was the amount of time she could hold something at arm's length before it became necessary to actually process it. Then she sat at her desk and acknowledged, privately and briefly, that this was bad. Not insurmountable, but bad. Victor Caldwell had spent the weekend preparing this while she and Ethan had spent it building a case against him, and the question was now which of them had done a more thorough job. She thought about the regulatory complaint from 6 years ago, the complaint that had been dismissed for insufficient evidence. She picked up her phone and called a former colleague from the law firm she'd worked at before Holloway Group, a paralegal named Greta, who had a memory like a filing cabinet and connections in several regulatory agencies. "I need a favor," Lily said when Greta picked up. "It involves a 6-year-old dismissed complaint, and I need to know if there's a name attached to the original witness statement, the one that wasn't included in the public filing." A pause. "Lily, that's not public record." "I know. Can you find it?" Another pause. "You didn't call me. I didn't look anything up. And you owe me lunch, somewhere good. Anywhere you want." She hung up and went back to work. Ethan called her into his office at 2. She sat across from his desk, and he was on his feet. He'd been on his feet most of the day. She could tell from the slight restlessness of the office, the way his chair was pushed back and hadn't been moved in hours. He stood at the window the way he had Monday morning, but without the weight of it. Today he was electric in a contained way, the kind of energy that came from a person who had been still for too long and had finally found something to move toward. "Tomorrow," he said, "the meeting starts at 9. Caldwell is going to push his agenda item in the first 30 minutes. Flanking move. He wants to get it in before the standard business so it reframes the entire session." "What's your counter?" He turned from the window. "I present the financial evidence against him directly to the full board before the agenda opens. No warning, no advance circulation. He walks in expecting to control the room, and instead he's looking at 4 years of documented misconduct." She thought about that. The element of surprise matters, but only if your documentation is unimpeachable. "Is it?" She held his gaze. "The documentation I gave you is unimpeachable. The question is whether legal can package it correctly overnight. They're working on it now. They'll have a presentation deck by 6 a.m. He paused. "I want you in that room tomorrow." She blinked. "The board meeting. You compiled the evidence. You understand it better than anyone in legal who's been working with it for 24 hours. If there are questions, I'm not a board member or an officer. You're executive administrative coordinator. There's no bylaw preventing staff from being present in a support capacity." He looked at her steadily. "I want you there." She thought about several objections and examined each of them. They were all valid. They were also all, in the final assessment, less important than the fact that he was right. She did understand the documentation better than anyone who'd come to it in the past day. "All right," she said, "there's something else." He moved to his desk and sat down, which meant this was the part he'd been building toward. "Caldwell is going to come after you personally, in that room. He's going to use the photo, the coverage, the perception of impropriety. He's going to suggest that you've been given access you shouldn't have, that the documentation itself might be compromised because of your relationship to me." She absorbed that. "And what do you say to that?" "I say that your employment record is flawless, that you've operated well within your professional scope, and that the documentation is sourced from public records and company filings that anyone with the appropriate access could have found." He paused. "And I say that the attempt to discredit you is itself evidence of the kind of person he is." That last part is less provable. It doesn't need to be proven. It needs to be said. She was quiet for a moment. "He's going to be humiliated in front of the full board." "Yes." "He's not going to take that without fighting back." "I know." "What's the worst version of what he can do tomorrow?" Ethan looked at her steadily. "Convince enough board members to call for my resignation pending investigation. Frame everything as a conflict of interest and create enough uncertainty that the board decides it's safer to remove me than to act on the evidence." "Is that possible?" A beat. "It's possible." He didn't dress it up. "It's less possible than it was before you found what you found, but it's possible." She sat with that, the honest version of it, The part where she'd spent 2 days building something and it might still not be enough. Okay, she said. Okay. What time do you want me here tomorrow? 7. We'll do a run-through before anyone else arrives. She stood up. At the door, she stopped and turned back. Ethan. The name still felt slightly unfamiliar in her mouth, so she'd spent 3 years not using it. Whatever happens tomorrow, you know what he's been doing. The board will know. That doesn't go away even if the day goes badly. He looked at her from across the room. I know. I just wanted to say it. I know, he said again, quieter. Thank you. She went back to her desk. Greta called at 4:17. There was a witness, Greta said without preamble, to the original complaint 6 years ago. The statement was sealed at the witness's request, which is why it wasn't in the public filing. The name on the sealed statement is a man named Thomas Reedy. He was CFO of a company called Arcturus Holdings at the time. Lily wrote it down. What happened to him? Left Arcturus 6 months after the complaint was filed. Went private sector. I don't know where he is now. That's enough, Lily said. That's a name. Thank you. She found Thomas Reedy in 40 minutes. He was currently the financial director of a mid-sized logistics company in New Jersey, which was close enough to relevant that her pulse picked up slightly. She composed a careful email, brief, professional, identifying herself by name and position, and making clear she was not acting in a legal capacity, simply reaching out on a private matter that she believed he would find relevant. She pressed send and sat back and thought about the probability that he'd respond before 9 a.m. tomorrow. Not high, but not zero. She worked until 6. At 6:10, as she was packing up to leave, a message arrived in her personal email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line was, "You should stop." She stared at it for a moment. She opened it. It was 3 sentences. No signature. What you're doing is going to hurt you more than it hurts anyone else. You're not equipped for this. Walk away while you still can. She read it 3 times. Then she forwarded it to Ethan's encrypted email with the note. Received this 6 minutes ago. Personal email, unknown sender, keeping original for records. Then she copied it to the folder on her home drive that was getting considerably larger than she'd expected when she started it on Sunday afternoon. She did not reply to the email. She was in the elevator going down when her phone buzzed. Ethan. I saw it, he said. I figured you'd want to know immediately. Are you okay? She considered the question honestly. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. There was something in her stomach that she'd describe as heightened alertness rather than fear. But the line between those two things was thinner than she usually admitted. Yes, it's intimidation. It's not a threat. It's close to one. It's close to one, she agreed. But it's also a sign that someone is worried. If they weren't worried, they wouldn't have sent it. A pause. That's one way to read it. It's the accurate way. She stepped out into the lobby and through the revolving door into the evening air, which was cold and clear and smelled like the city after rain. I'll see you at 7. 7, he said. Lily, take a different route home tonight. She almost told him that was unnecessary. She almost said he was being overcautious. Instead, she thought about the visitor log in Arm Alone and the email with no signature and said, all right. She took the bus instead of the subway. Small alteration, probably meaningless. But the habit of thinking ahead had kept her out of worse situations than this. Her mother was in the kitchen when she got home, the television on in the background the way it always was, the smell of something good on the stove. Elena Bennett was 56 years old with her daughter's same dark eyes and the kind of face that had absorbed decades of difficulty and come through it without hardness. She looked up when Lily came in. You're late, she said. I know. I'm sorry. Lily dropped her bag and kissed her mother's cheek. Something at work. Elena looked at her daughter with the particular sharpness of a woman who had been reading her child's face for 30 years and knew every register of it. What kind of something? The complicated kind. Lily sat down at the kitchen table, which was small and slightly wobbly on one leg, the same table that had been in their kitchen since she was 9 years old. It'll be fine. You always say that. It's usually true. Elena looked at her for another moment, then turned back to the stove. Eat first, then tell me. Lily ate, rice and beans and chicken that was better than anything in any midtown restaurant, and told her mother the version of it that could be told without either minimizing the stakes or causing unnecessary worry, which was a fairly narrow version. Elena listened without interrupting, which she'd always been good at. "This man," she said finally, "your boss, he's going to stand up in that room tomorrow." "Yes." "And you're going to be there." "Yes." Elena was quiet for a moment. She refilled Lily's glass with water without being asked. "You trust him?" Lily looked at the table, at the slightly wobbly leg, at the water glass her mother had just refilled. "I think so," she said. "You think so, or you do?" She looked up. "I do." Her mother nodded once, as if something had been confirmed. "Then go get some sleep. You have to be there at 7. She went to bed at 10:30 and lay awake for a while anyway. Not from fear. She'd examined the fear and found it manageable. More from the particular alertness of a person who knew tomorrow was going to be significant and whose brain was running through every possible version of it with the thoroughness of someone who had survived difficult situations by being prepared for them. At 11:40, her phone buzzed. An email notification. Thomas Ridey. She sat up in bed and read it in the dark. He'd written back in 4 short paragraphs. He confirmed he'd been a witness to the original complaint against Victor Caldwell. He confirmed the complaint had been accurate. He said he'd been pressured to withdraw his cooperation with the investigation. Not threatened, precisely, but pressured, in the way that powerful people pressured other people without leaving fingerprints. He'd left Arcturus shortly after because the environment had become untenable. And then, if someone is putting together a case against Caldwell and needs a first-hand account, I've been waiting 6 years for someone to ask. Tell me what you need. She read it twice. Then she opened her laptop and typed a reply that was professional and careful and contained because the feeling that was moving through her right now was the kind that needed to be handled carefully or it would make her sloppy. She sent it and closed the laptop and lay back down in the dark. Sleep didn't come for another hour. She was back in the office at 6:40 the next morning, 20 minutes ahead of schedule, because she'd given up waiting for the alarm at 5:30. The packet was updated, the Thomas Ridey communication was printed and added to a sealed appendix with a note to Ethan explaining who he was and what his statement meant. She had it on the conference table in the small room adjacent to the boardroom by the time Ethan arrived at 7:03. He looked at the appendix immediately. He read it standing up without saying anything. When he finished, he looked at her. "You found a witness," he said. "He found us. I just sent an email. Last night. At 11:40 something." A pause. "After someone sent you a threatening email, and I told you to take a different route home. I wasn't going to sleep anyway." He stood there for a moment with the paper in his hand, and she couldn't fully read the expression. It was too layered for her current level of caffeine. Then he set the paper down on the table and said, quietly, and with a precision that made it land differently than most things he said, "I don't know what I would have done this week without you." She didn't do anything performative with that. She didn't deflect or minimize, which was her usual instinct with compliments. She just looked at him and said, "You would have figured it out. Later, with more damage. Maybe." She gathered her own copy of the packet. "The meeting starts in 2 hours. Do you want to run through the presentation?" "Yes." He was still looking at her. "Lily. Ethan. After this is over," he stopped, started differently. "I want to have a conversation that isn't about work." She held his gaze. The conference room was quiet and cold, and the morning light was coming through the window at a low angle, and she was tired in the specific way of someone who had not slept enough for 3 consecutive nights, and there was an email threatening her in her personal inbox, and in 2 hours she was going to sit in a boardroom while 2 powerful men decided which version of the truth was going to win. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said, and they sat down and ran through the presentation. By 8:30, the 32nd floor was filling up, and the boardroom across the hall from the executive suite was being set up by a member of the facilities team who had no idea what was about to happen in it. Lily watched through the glass wall as chairs were straightened and water glasses arranged, and a projector warmed up at the front of the room. Board members began arriving at 8:40. She knew most of them by name. She'd been managing their communications and logistics for nearly 3 years. There were 9 in total. She watched them greet each other and settle into seats and check their phones with the particular contained energy of people who had read the weekend's coverage and come to this meeting with opinions already formed. Victor Caldwell arrived at 8:51. He walked in looking exactly as he always did, silver-haired, well-tailored, the practiced warmth arriving a half-second ahead of him. He shook hands with 2 board members near the door. He glanced around the room. His eyes landed on Lily, standing near the wall with her copy of the packet. Something shifted in his expression. Microscopic. Gone almost before it was there. The warmth didn't waver. That was the thing about Victor. The warmth was always there, deployed and reliable. But underneath it, for 1/2 second, she saw that he recognized what her presence in that room meant. She met his gaze and held it, and did not look away. He moved to his seat. At 9 o'clock exactly, Ethan walked into the boardroom, and the morning that had been building since a freight elevator stopped between floors on a Friday night in a storm finally arrived at the place it had been moving toward all along. He set his copy of the packet on the table. He looked around at the 9 faces looking back at him. He did not sit down. "Before we begin," he said, and his voice was even and completely controlled and carried the particular quality of a person who had decided exactly what they were going to say and was going to say it without apology. "There's something this board needs to see." He nodded at Lily. She pressed the key on the laptop that put the first slide on the projector screen, and the room shifted, and what happened next was the thing she'd spent 3 sleepless nights building toward. She didn't look at Victor Caldwell's face when the first document appeared on the screen. She looked at the board members, the 9 people who were going to decide what happened next. She watched their eyes move from the screen to Ethan, from Ethan to the screen, and she watched the expressions change as the weight of what they were looking at became clear. That was when she allowed herself, briefly and privately, to exhale. The first slide was the voting record. Not the analysis, not the conclusion, just the raw comparison. 2 columns, side by side. The internal summary on the left, the public record on the right. The discrepancies highlighted in a color that didn't require explanation. Ethan let it sit on the screen for a full 10 seconds without saying anything, because some things were more effective when you gave a room time to understand them without being told what to understand. The silence in the boardroom had a specific quality. It was the silence of 9 people processing something that rearranged what they thought they knew. Margaret Osei spoke first. She was 64, a former federal appellate judge who had been on the Holloway board for 7 years, and she had the particular quality of a person who had spent decades in rooms where the truth was being argued over and had developed an excellent instinct for when someone was finally telling it. "Where did this come from?" she said. Her voice was neutral, professional. The question was not skeptical. It was foundational. She wanted to know what she was looking at before she reacted to it. "Internal company records cross-referenced with public filings," Ethan said. "The originals are in the packet in front of you, fully sourced. The analysis was compiled independently, outside of legal, and then verified by outside counsel overnight." He paused. "Please turn to page 12. The room rustled. Pages turned. Lily stood at the wall and watched and kept her breathing even and her face professionally neutral, which took more effort than she showed. She'd been in the room for 4 minutes, and already the atmosphere had the particular pressure of something that had been building for a long time and was now releasing all at once, like a weather system finally breaking. She did not look at Victor Caldwell. Then she did. He was sitting at the far end of the table, 2 seats from the chair he usually occupied at the head. He'd been displaced by the setup. Ethan had subtly reconfigured the room's arrangement in a way that put him at the head position rather than Caldwell, a detail that she'd noticed when she'd come in at 6:40 and that she suspected Caldwell had noticed about 30 seconds after walking in. His jacket was on, his hands were flat on the table in front of him, and his face was doing the thing she'd seen it do for 3 years. The warm professional composure, the attentive expression, the practiced stillness of a man who had navigated difficult rooms for 40 years and was not going to let anyone see him react until he decided how he wanted to react. But his hands were flat on the table with a firmness that wasn't relaxed. That was the tell. Small, and she might have missed it on a different day, but she'd been studying this particular man for the past 3 days, and she knew his body language now the way she'd learned Ethan's, through sustained, quiet attention. Victor Caldwell was holding himself together, deliberately, with effort. The fourth discrepancy, Margaret Osey said from down the table. Page 17, the Prescott advisory vote. Can you explain what we're looking at here? Ethan turned to it. The internal summary from March of last year records the advisory vote, SCI vote, as 4 in favor, 3 opposed, 2 abstaining. The public record filed with the regulatory body shows 5 in favor, 2 opposed, 2 abstaining. 1 vote was changed. The change shifts the recorded outcome from a plurality to a clear majority. Who had access to both documents? She asked. The internal summary was accessible to board members, the CEO, and the corporate secretary at the time of filing. The public record would have been submitted by the corporate secretary's office. He paused. The corporate secretary reports to the board's governance committee, which I chair, said a man 2 seats to Margaret's left. Gerald Park, 60, Korean-American, private equity background, methodical and careful and not someone who wasted words. He'd been reading the document since the first page and hadn't looked up. He looked up now. Which I chair, he repeated, and his voice had a quality in it that Lily recognized, the specific sound of a person who was angry and was deciding exactly how to use it. And I'm looking at alterations to documents filed under my governance committee's authority that I had no knowledge of. I know, Ethan said. This is not a small thing. I know that too. That's why we're here. A long pause. Gerald Park looked at the packet in front of him, then at the screen, then, for the first time since the meeting started, at Victor Caldwell. It was not a warm look, and that was when Victor Caldwell made his move. Ethan, he said. His voice was exactly as warm as it always was. Calibrated, patient. The voice of a man who had decided on his strategy and was committing to it fully. I think we all appreciate you bringing forward concerns, and obviously if there are genuine discrepancies in company records, that requires investigation. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member, deliberate and unhurried. But I think we also need to be honest about the context in which this presentation is happening. Ethan looked at him. You've had a difficult week, Caldwell continued. The media coverage has been uncomfortable. There are questions, legitimate questions, about judgment and professional boundaries. And I worry, I say this genuinely, as someone who has enormous respect for what you've built here, that what we're looking at this morning is a document package assembled in a very short period of time under considerable pressure to redirect attention from those legitimate questions. He set his hands, that same deliberate flatness, on the table. That's not an accusation, that's a concern. The room shifted. Lily felt it, the slight tilt of attention, the way some of the faces that had been hard and processing went slightly uncertain. It was well done. She had to give him that. It was exactly the right move. Don't deny, don't fight the evidence directly. Reframe the whole exercise as something suspect. The documents are sourced from public filings, Ethan said. His voice didn't change. Anyone in this room can verify them independently. The analysis was confirmed by outside counsel, who have had no contact with me regarding the media situation this week. He paused. Would you like the name of the firm so you can call them directly? A beat. That won't be necessary. I think it might be, Margaret Osey said. Not unkindly, precisely. Victor, I'd like to hear your response to the specific discrepancies, not to the context or the framing, to the 4 documented alterations in the voting record. Caldwell looked at her. Something moved in his expression. The composure held, but there was a quality to the hold now, a tightness. Margaret, I think before we go further down this road, the Kessler vote, she said. October of last year. The internal record shows 6-3 against. The public record shows 7-2 against. 1 vote was changed. She put her hand flat on the table. Was your vote changed? The room was very still. I'm not going to respond to a document I've had 30 minutes to review, Caldwell said, without my own counsel present. The sentence landed in the room like a stone in a pond, and every ripple it made went in the wrong direction for him. because that was the sentence of a person who needed a lawyer, and everyone in the room understood that immediately. Gerald Park leaned back in his chair. Margaret Osei looked down at her packet. Two of the other board members exchanged a glance that lasted half a second and contained an entire conversation. Ethan waited. He didn't press. He understood, and Lily understood, watching from the wall, that the most powerful thing in the room right now was the silence after Caldwell's sentence, and filling it would only diminish it. It was Caldwell who broke it. He looked around the table with the practiced composure of a man executing a pivot. I think we should table this discussion pending a proper independent review. I move to bring in an external auditing committee before any further— I'd like to add something, Ethan said, before we discuss process. Caldwell stopped. Ethan looked at him for a moment, directly, without anger, without anything that could be characterized as personal, and then he looked at the rest of the board. The packet also includes documentation of beneficial ownership positions held through intermediary companies by a current board member and entities that are direct competitors to Holloway Group in the current Meridian contract bid. That documentation is on pages 23 through 31. He paused. In addition to the voting record discrepancies, this constitutes an undisclosed conflict of interest in violation of the board's governance charter. Margaret Osei was already turning to page 23. Gerald Park had not moved. He was looking at Caldwell with the expression of a man who had arrived this morning with a calibrated opinion about this meeting and had watched it become completely irrelevant to what was actually happening. Victor, he said quietly, do you have an ownership interest in Meridian Logistics Partners? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Through a holding structure, there is an indirect yes or no, Gerald said, still quiet, still even. The evenness of it was almost worse than anger would have been. Caldwell's composure cracked, not dramatically. It wasn't a collapse, it was more like a hairline fracture, the kind that started at one point and sent a very fine line outward in all directions. His jaw tightened. His hands moved for the first time, folding together on the table. This is an oversimplification of a complex financial yes or no, Margaret Osei said. The room held. Indirectly, Caldwell said, and his voice had changed. Still controlled, but the warmth was gone now, stripped off. What was underneath it was harder and older and considerably less interested in the feelings of the people around him. Through a structure that is entirely legal and has been disclosed in the appropriate filings. Yet it has not been disclosed to this board, Gerald Park said, which is what the charter requires. The next 40 minutes were not comfortable for anyone in the room. They were least comfortable for Victor Caldwell, but they were not easy for anyone else either, because what happened when something like this broke open was not clean. It was messy and uncertain, and required every person in the room to reckon with the fact that they had been sitting on a board alongside someone who had been doing this for years, while they ran agenda items and debated projections and believed they understood what was happening around them. Lily stood at the wall and did not sit down. She answered 2 questions directed at her, both from Margaret Osei, both precise, both about sourcing methodology for specific documents, and she answered them clearly and without elaboration and watched the former judge absorb the information the way she absorbed everything, completely, without visible reaction, and then filed it somewhere it would be useful. Caldwell tried 3 more redirections. Each one was a version of the same argument. The documentation was assembled under duress, the timing was suspicious, the relationship between Ethan and the woman who compiled the evidence was itself a conflict of interest that undermined everything presented here. Each time he hit a wall. The wall was the documents themselves, publicly sourced, independently verified, sitting in front of 9 people who could read. After his 3rd attempt, Margaret Osei said, without looking up from her packet, "Victor, I've been on this board for 7 years, and I have never once questioned your judgment." She looked up. "I'm questioning it now. I'm also questioning considerably more than that. I'd suggest you stop talking and let us discuss process." Caldwell was quiet after that. The vote to suspend Caldwell from board activities pending an independent investigation took 11 minutes to organize and 4 minutes to conduct. It passed 7-1. The one dissenting vote came from a board member named Franklin Reese, who had been on the board for 2 years and appeared genuinely uncertain about what was happening rather than actively opposed, which was its own kind of information. Caldwell himself did not vote. He sat at his end of the table with his hands folded and his face arranged into something that was no longer warmth and not quite anything else, and waited for it to be over. When the vote was recorded, he stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He looked at Ethan, not with anger, which Lily had expected, with something stranger and colder. "You've made an enemy today," he said, conversationally, as if he were commenting on the weather. "I had one already," Ethan said. "I just didn't know it." Caldwell left the room without looking at anyone else. The door closed. For about 10 seconds, the room was completely quiet. The kind of quiet that followed something significant, where no one was quite ready to be the first person to speak, because speaking meant acknowledging that it had actually happened. Then Margaret Osei said, "Ethan, I owe you an apology on behalf of this board's oversight process. This should have been caught earlier." "It was well concealed," Ethan said. His voice was tired now. The energy that had carried him through the presentation was still there, but it had a different quality. The adrenaline burning off, the weight of what had actually just occurred settling in. "That's not sufficient," she said. "I'll be leading the independent review personally. I want outside auditors, and I want the regulatory complaint from 6 years ago included in scope." She looked up from her notes. "Your EA, Miss Bennett, the Reedy contact and the beneficial ownership analysis, that was her work." "Yes." Margaret looked at Lily directly. She had the kind of eyes that took your measure quickly and didn't require much time to complete the process. "Thank you," she said. "You did careful work." "I did thorough work," Lily said, and then wondered if that sounded wrong. "Thank you." Something close to a smile crossed Margaret's face. She looked back at Ethan. "We have a great deal to clean up. Let's start." They were in that room until 12:40. By the time it was over, the outline of the independent investigation had been established, the communication plan for the regulatory bodies was drafted, and the framework for unwinding Caldwell's influence on 4 years of board decisions was in progress. It was the beginning of what would clearly be a long process, not the end of anything, and everyone in the room understood that. But beginnings were what they had, and they were more than they'd walked in with. Lily's feet hurt. She'd been standing for the better part of 4 hours. When the last board member filed out, she gathered her copies of the documents and her laptop and started for the door. She was thinking about the sandwich she was going to get from the place on 53rd that did the turkey and avocado, because she hadn't eaten since the granola bar at 6 a.m., and her body was starting to register a formal complaint. "Lily." She turned. Ethan was still at the head of the table. The room was empty now except for the two of them and the remains of what had just happened. Water glasses, printed packets, a whiteboard someone had used to diagram the investigation timeline. He looked, she thought, like a person who had just set down something very heavy and wasn't quite sure yet what to do with his hands. That was... He stopped, looked at the table, started again. "You should know that what you did this week, what you spent 3 days building, is the reason this morning went the way it went." "I know," she said, not immodestly, just accurately the way she'd said it before. "I'm not done." He looked up. "I've been thinking about what to say since this morning started, which is not usually a problem I have, and I'm finding it..." He made a small sound of frustration with himself. "I need you to understand that this isn't about the investigation. This isn't about Caldwell or the documents or Meridian." He paused. "What I said Tuesday evening, about wanting a conversation that wasn't about work." She stood at the door with her laptop and her documents and looked at him across the empty boardroom. "I meant it," he said. "I know you did," she said. "I don't know how to do this," he said, with a directness that was almost startling. "I've been alone for 4 years. I've been functional. I've been a good father, I think, and a competent executive, and I have managed to keep every single part of my life in its correct compartment, and I was fine with that. I had decided I was fine with that." He looked at her steadily. "And then 7 hours in a freight elevator." "7 hours," she said. "I'm not saying that's where it started. I think..." He stopped. "I think I noticed you long before that. I just didn't let myself..." He pressed his hand to the back of a chair. "I was managing it, the way I managed everything." She walked back into the room. Not all the way. She stopped a few feet from the end of the table and put her documents down and looked at him. "I noticed you too," she said. In case that wasn't clear. It was not clear. "I'm good at not making things clear when it serves me." He looked at her. Something in his face relaxed. Not all the way, not completely, because she was starting to understand that all the way wasn't something that happened for him easily or quickly, and that was fine. "What do we do with this?" he asked. "I don't know exactly," she said. "I know that there are about 15 complications I can list from here." She paused. "Professional ones. I work for you." "That's—" He stopped. "I'm aware that's a complication. And I know you have a daughter, and that's not a small thing to navigate." "No," he said. "It's not. And I know neither of us is—" She searched for the right word. "Easy. You're closed off in ways that took a freight elevator and a crisis to crack open. And I'm—" She thought about the granola bars and the manuscript and the 6 weeks of untouched chapters and the habit of not needing things. "I'm not easy either." He looked at her with a steadiness that she was beginning to recognize as his version of openness. This was what it looked like when Ethan Holloway wasn't managing himself. Completely still, completely present. "I know," he said. "So I don't know exactly," she said again, "but I know it's not nothing. I haven't thought something was nothing in 3 years and then suddenly thought it was something since Friday." "Neither have I." A pause. The room was quiet. Outside the windows, the city was doing its midday thing, noise and light, and the ordinary, beautiful chaos of 12 million people going about their business, completely unaware that 2 people in a conference room on the 32nd floor were trying to figure out something that had no instruction manual. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked. She blinked. "Tonight?" "I was thinking not tonight. I was thinking when things are less. When the investigation isn't 3 days old and the board isn't actively restructuring and I'm not going to spend the meal distracted by logistics." She thought about that. "That's practical. I'm a practical person." "You're a complicated person who presents as practical." Something moved in his face. "That's accurate." "So am I," she said. "I know." He said it the way he'd said things in the elevator, like he'd been thinking it for longer than the conversation had been happening. "Dinner, when things settle, somewhere without any of this around it." "Okay," she said. She picked up her documents. At the door she stopped and turned back once more, because she seemed to have developed a habit of that. "Ethan, for what it's worth, I think you've been a good father for 4 years in circumstances that would have broken most people. I don't think that's a small thing either." He looked at her. She'd caught him off guard. She could tell by the way his face didn't have a response ready. "Go eat something," she said. "You've been awake since 5. She went to her desk. She called Greta and told her she owed her the best lunch in Manhattan. She called her mother and said, briefly and without detail, that it had gone well. And then she sat at her computer and started processing the fallout. The emails that had accumulated during the 4-hour meeting, the calendar items that needed adjustment, the communications that would need drafting for the regulatory process ahead. She was 20 minutes into it when Ethan appeared at her desk. He set a paper bag on the corner of it. From the sandwich place on 53rd, turkey and avocado. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You mentioned it once," he said. "That it was your usual." She didn't remember telling him that. She must have said it in passing, months ago, the kind of thing people said without thinking, the kind of thing you forgot immediately unless you were paying attention. He'd been paying attention. He just hadn't said anything. "Thank you," she said. He went back into his office and closed the door. She ate the sandwich at her desk and continued working, and there was a quality to the afternoon that she didn't have a precise word for. Not light, because the situation was genuinely complicated, and the work ahead was significant, and nothing was resolved in any final sense. More like the particular feeling of a day that had done what it was supposed to do. The investigation moved quickly in the weeks that followed, the way investigations did when the documentation was solid and the regulatory bodies had enough to work with. Thomas Reedy's witness statement went into the official record. The beneficial ownership positions were confirmed by auditors. The altered board minutes were verified by 3 independent forensic accountants. Caldwell's lawyers put out 3 statements in the first 10 days. Each one was more carefully worded than the last, and the careful wording was its own kind of admission. The financial press, which had spent the previous weekend framing Ethan as a distracted executive making poor decisions, spent the following weeks reframing the entire narrative. There were profiles, parquets, pieces about how the Holloway Group's CEO had uncovered systematic board corruption and moved swiftly to address it. The photo from the lobby was still out there, still circulating, but its meaning had shifted. It was no longer the thing that raised questions. It was, somewhat absurdly, the starting point of a story that had ended somewhere much larger. Lily's name appeared in 2 of the pieces. She hadn't asked for it and hadn't been consulted, but someone at outside counsel had apparently provided some background to a reporter. Executive Administrative Coordinator, key role in compiling evidence. She read her name in print and felt something complicated about it. Not quite pride, not quite discomfort. Something in between. She showed it to her mother, who read it twice and said, "You should have gotten more than 1 sentence." "I don't need more than 1 sentence." "I know you don't need it," Elena said. "That's different from deserving it." Lily didn't argue. On a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the board meeting, Ethan appeared at her desk at 4:30. This was not unusual anymore. He'd developed in the past weeks a habit of stopping at her desk in the late afternoon that was different from the functional stops of before. Less purposeful. More like a person who'd found a place they didn't mind being. "I have a request," he said. She looked up from her screen. "Professional or personal?" "Personal, sort of." He leaned against the edge of her desk, which he'd also started doing. "Sophie has a thing Saturday morning. The performance run through at school. She wants to bring someone." Lily looked at him carefully. "Someone?" She asked specifically. He said it with the careful neutrality of a man who was delivering information and very deliberately not editorializing. "I told her I'd ask." Lily sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. A 7-year-old with her father's dark hair and her mother's pale green eyes, asking specifically. "What time Saturday?" she said. Something shifted in his face. 10? "I'll be there," she said. He pushed off from the edge of her desk and went back toward his office. And she turned back to her screen, and outside the windows, New York was doing what it always did. Enormous and indifferent, and full of people carrying things nobody could see from the outside. She opened the document on her laptop. The manuscript. The chapter she'd started on the subway 3 weeks ago and had been coming back to slowly in the evenings. It was 60 pages longer than it had been before the blackout. She read the last paragraph she'd written. She added 2 sentences. She saved it. Saturday morning arrived the way November mornings did in New York. Cold and flat and bright. The kind of light that had no warmth in it but made everything look very clear. Lily took the subway from Queens, which meant she was on the platform at 8:40 with a coffee she'd made at home in a travel mug because buying coffee on the way was $4 she'd rather keep, and she stood in the cold and thought about what she was doing. She was going to a 7-year-old school performance run-through. She was going because the 7-year-old had asked specifically. She was going because the 7-year-old's father had leaned against her desk on a Thursday afternoon and delivered that information with the careful neutrality of a person trying very hard not to make it a bigger thing than it already was. And she had said yes before she'd fully thought it through, which was not her usual approach to anything. She rode the train into the city and watched the stations pass and drank her coffee and thought about the word specifically. Sophie had asked specifically. Children that age asked for what they wanted with a directness that adults spent decades unlearning, and the fact that a 7-year-old she'd never met had formed an opinion about her felt significant in a way she wasn't entirely prepared for. The school was on the Upper West Side. Lily found it without difficulty. She was good at finding things, and stood outside for a moment looking at the building, which was old brick and had the particular look of a place that had been educating children for a long time and was not particularly impressed with itself about it. Ethan was waiting just inside the entrance with Sophie beside him. The first thing Lily registered was that Sophie was smaller than she'd expected, which was irrational because she knew the child was 7. Children were small. This was not new information. But there was something about the reality of her. Dark hair and 2 uneven braids that suggested Ethan had done them himself. The pale green eyes Lily had only seen in a framed photograph. A coat that was slightly too big for her because children grew faster than coat purchases could keep up with. That made the photograph feel very far away. Sophie looked at Lily with the frank assessment of a child who had not yet learned to disguise her curiosity. She looked at her the way children looked at things they were trying to understand, thoroughly, without self-consciousness, without any of the social machinery that adults use to make the process less obvious. "You're Lily," she said. Not a question. "I am," Lily said. "You're Sophie. Dad said you work with him." "I do." Sophie considered this. "He smiles more on days when he comes home and says it was a good day at work." She said it with the tone of someone presenting evidence. "I thought maybe it was because of you." Behind Sophie, Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Lily kept her face entirely neutral. "That's very observant," she said. "I'm observant," Sophie confirmed. "Dad says it too." She seemed satisfied with the confirmation and turned to go inside, apparently done with the introduction, as if she'd gathered the information she needed and could proceed. "The run-through starts in 10 minutes, she called back over her shoulder. "We should go in." Lily looked at Ethan. He was looking at his daughter with an expression that mixed mortification with something else. Something that was trying very hard not to be amusement and was losing. "She's 7, he said. "She has no filter." "I noticed," Lily said. "I liked it." They went inside. The run-through lasted an hour and 15 minutes, and Sophie had the second act lead, which meant she was on stage for about 20 minutes of it in a costume that involved a lot of silver fabric and a cardboard crown that sat at a slight angle because it was too big for her head. She performed with the complete unselfconscious commitment that children brought to performance. No second-guessing, no awareness of the audience, just the full investment of a person who had decided this was the thing she was doing right now. Lily sat next to Ethan in the third row of folding chairs and watched. She noticed, without making it obvious that she was noticing, the way he watched Sophie. It was different from every other expression she'd cataloged on his face over the past 3+ years, stripped of all the management and control and professional distance. Just a man watching his daughter pretend to be a queen in a too big cardboard crown, and the love in it was so unguarded that it almost felt intrusive to observe. Almost. She watched anyway. At one point, Sophie delivered a line with unexpected force, something about being brave in spite of fear, which was apparently the climactic speech of the second act. And the small audience of parents and teachers made a sound of appreciation, and Sophie broke character for exactly 1 second to look directly at her father with an expression that said, "Did you see that?" And Ethan, who did not smile easily or often or without cause, smiled, wide and real and completely undefended. Lily looked away because it felt like the right thing to do. After the run-through, Sophie found them in the hallway with the crown still on, tilted further to one side than before. She was accompanied by 2 other children who were introduced as Maya and Jacob, and who assessed Lily with less directness than Sophie had, but equal thoroughness. "Are you coming to the real one?" Sophie asked. "The November 14th performance?" "Yes." Lily glanced at Ethan, who was doing his careful neutrality thing again. She looked back at Sophie. "If your dad has room in the schedule." "He does," Sophie said immediately. "I already checked." She looked up at Ethan. "Can we get hot chocolate? Maya's mom said there's a place 2 blocks over." "Did she?" "She said it's good." "She might be right," Ethan said with the tone of a parent who had learned not to argue with the specific logic of a 7-year-old in a good mood. He looked at Lily. "If you have time." She had time. She'd left the entire morning open, which she wasn't going to admit, but she had. They got hot chocolate 2 blocks over, at a place that was small and warm and slightly crowded with weekend families, and they sat at a table near the window with Sophie between them, which was not a configuration Lily had anticipated when she'd woken up that morning. Sophie had removed the crown, but was holding it in her lap with the possessiveness of something important. She asked Lily 3 questions about her job, 2 questions about queens, and 1 question about whether Lily had any pets. "No pets," Lily said. "My apartment doesn't allow them." "That's sad," Sophie said. "I have a plant." Sophie considered this. "What kind?" "A pothos. It's very hard to kill." "Is it alive?" "Currently, yes." Sophie nodded with the gravity of someone who appreciated perseverance in a plant. Then she said with no transition and no apparent awareness that she was changing the subject, "My mom had a plant too. Dad says she could grow anything." The table went quiet. Ethan was looking at his hot chocolate. His jaw was set in the way it did when he was managing something, but he didn't stop her or redirect, which Lily understood was its own kind of decision, letting Sophie say what she needed to say without flinching from it. "She sounds like she was good at it," Lily said, keeping her voice steady and her tone the same as it had been. Not softer, not more careful. The same. Because she'd learned from years of watching people talk around hard things that hard things didn't need a different voice. They just needed someone willing to stay in the sentence. "Dad says she was good at a lot of things." Sophie was looking at the crown in her lap, turning it slightly. "I don't remember her very much. I was little, but Dad talks about her sometimes, so I know things." "That's good," Lily said. "Knowing things about people matters." Sophie looked up. "Do you know things about your dad?" A pause. "My dad left when I was pretty young. I know some things. Not as many as I'd like." Sophie absorbed this with the seriousness of a child processing information that didn't fit neatly into existing categories. "Is that hard?" "Sometimes," Lily said. "Not as much as it used to be." Sophie nodded slowly, and then, with the complete unpredictability of a 7-year-old, she picked up her hot chocolate and said, "Mine is the best. Want to try it?" Lily tried it. It was, in fact, excellent. Ethan was watching her from across the table with an expression she couldn't fully translate but recognized as one she'd been seeing more of in the past 3 weeks. The look of a person who was updating something, internally, quietly, about a situation they thought they understood. They walked back to the school for Sophie to pick up her things, and then Ethan walked Lily to the corner where she'd catch her subway. Sophie was ahead of them, walking the top of a low brick wall with her arms out like a balance beam, completely absorbed in this project and not paying them any attention. "She likes you," Ethan said. "She's easy to like in return," Lily said. "She doesn't take to everyone. Since Claire died, she's been careful with new people. The therapist says it's normal, healthy, actually, but it means she doesn't warm up quickly." He paused, watching Sophie make it to the end of the wall and hop off with total satisfaction. "She warmed up to you." Lily watched Sophie, too. The too big coat, the uneven braids, the cardboard crown tucked under her arm like a briefcase. "She asked me if I know things about my father." "I heard." I told her the truth. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Sophie asked me last week if you were coming to the run-through because you wanted to or because I asked you to." Lily looked at him. "What did you tell her?" "I told her both could be true." "That's accurate." She seemed satisfied with that. A pause. The city moved around them, strollers and dog walkers and 2 teenagers on bikes who needed to be more careful on the sidewalk. Sophie had found a pigeon to observe from a respectful distance and was watching it with the same complete focus she'd given everything else this morning. "Ethan," Lily said. "Yes." "You said you wanted to have dinner when things settled." "I did." "Things have settled somewhat." He looked at her. "Somewhat." "I'm not saying the investigation is resolved. I'm not saying everything is clean, but we've been—" She searched for the right framing. "We've been in a holding pattern, professionally, where neither of us has said anything beyond what we already said in the boardroom, and I think that's been practical and appropriate given the circumstances, but I'm starting to find it—" She stopped. "Frustrating?" he offered. "I was going to say insufficient," she said. Something moved in his face. "So was I," he said. So, he paused. "Thursday. There's a restaurant in the West Village I've been to once, 2 years ago. I thought about taking you there, and then thought it might be too—" He stopped. "I don't want to make this into a production. I just want to have dinner with you without this building around it." "Thursday," she said. "That works?" Sophie appeared at Ethan's elbow. She'd completed her pigeon observation and rejoined them with the matter-of-fact energy of someone who had finished one task and was ready for the next. She looked between them with those pale green eyes. "Are you coming to the real performance?" she asked Lily. "November 14th, Lily said. "I'll be there." Sophie looked satisfied. She slid her hand into her father's without looking at him. a gesture so practiced and automatic that it clearly happened all the time. The particular ease of a child who knew her parent was always going to be there when she reached. "Can we get lunch? I want noodles." "You always want noodles," Ethan said. "Because noodles are always good," Sophie said, with the certainty of someone stating a physical law. Lily smiled. She said goodbye, and Sophie said goodbye back with the same directness she'd deployed for everything else. And Ethan said Thursday with a quiet certainty that had no performance in it, and she walked to the subway entrance and went down the stairs. On the train back to Queens, she sat with her empty coffee mug and the memory of a cardboard crown at a slight angle and thought about the word specifically again. Sophie had asked specifically. That word, she understood now, carried more weight than she'd given it on the platform that morning. It meant she'd already been in that house, somehow, before she'd ever set foot in it. Thursday came. The restaurant was small and not trying too hard, which she appreciated. They ordered wine she didn't pretend to know and food she actually wanted, and for the first 40 minutes they talked about things that weren't the investigation or the board or Caldwell's lawyers or the Meridian contract, because they'd agreed, without explicitly agreeing, that those things could exist for one evening outside the frame. They talked about his childhood. He'd grown up in Connecticut, the son of a man who'd built a smaller version of what Ethan had eventually expanded, and the inheritance had come with expectations that had felt like walls before they'd felt like foundations. He talked about it the way people talked about formative pressure, not bitterly, but honestly, with the acknowledgement that something can shape you and cost you at the same time. She talked about the book, the real version of it again, but further along than the version she'd described in the elevator, 60 pages further, technically, plus the chapter she'd been unlocking in pieces since October. She told him about the opening section, which was about her grandmother's kitchen and the specific smell of a particular cleaning product that her grandmother used and that Lily couldn't smell without being immediately transported. She told him that the hardest part of writing about people you knew was that you loved them, and that love kept trying to protect them from your honest observation. "And how do you get past that?" he asked. "I try to remember that honest observation is also a form of love," she said. "That seeing someone clearly, all of it, not just the parts that are easy, is actually more respectful than protecting them from the truth of themselves." He looked at her across the table. "Is that something you believe generally?" "Yes." She paused. "It's something I'm still practicing." "At what?" "Letting people see me clearly," she said. "I'm good at seeing. I'm less good at being seen." He held her gaze. "I've noticed." "I know you have. Is this—" He gestured slightly at the table, at the space between them. "Is this helping?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "It's uncomfortable, and yes." He almost smiled. "That's encouraging somehow." "I think discomfort and significance tend to overlap," she said. "If something doesn't cost you anything, it's probably not important enough to keep." He was quiet for a moment. His wine glass was half empty, and he turned it slightly on the table, a small movement she'd come to recognize as him thinking. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it correctly, which means I've been trying to find the right version of it for about 2 weeks. She waited. "When Claire died," he started, and then paused. He looked at his wine glass, looked up. "I made a decision, not a conscious one. I didn't sit down and decide. It just happened, in the way that grief shapes you without asking permission. I decided that I was going to be excellent at the things I could control, and I was going to let the other things, the things I couldn't control, the things that required me to need someone, the things that could hurt, I was going to let those go quiet." He paused. "It worked. For 4 years, it worked reasonably well. I was good at my job. I was a decent father. I had everything in its compartment. And then the lights went out," she said. "And then the lights went out," he said. "And I was stuck in a small box with a person I had been looking at without seeing for 3 years, and she told me things that were true, and I told her things that were true, and I remembered—" He stopped. "I remembered what it was like to be in a conversation where you were actually in it, where you weren't managing, where you said what you meant, and the other person said what they meant, and you were both just—" He shook his head slightly. "I hadn't had that in a long time." Lily looked at him. He was not performing this. That was the thing about Ethan when his walls were down. There was nothing theatrical about him. He was just saying what was true. with the same directness he brought to everything else, and the simplicity of it was somehow more affecting than anything more polished would have been. "I know what you mean," she said. "About the compartments." She looked at her own glass. "I built mine differently. Mine were about not needing things, not letting myself want what I was pretty sure I couldn't have. I got very good at looking at my life and finding what was enough and being satisfied with enough. And now?" She looked up. "I'm finding that enough is a word I've been using as a ceiling when it should have been a floor." He held her gaze. Something in his expression was very still and very certain. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, not apologetically, practically. "I mean, I know what it is. I just don't know what it becomes." "Neither do I," he said. "I know it's not nothing. I've established that." "You've established that," she agreed. "And I know that Sophie asked for you specifically on Saturday." "She did." "And I know that I've been walking past your desk for 3 years and not stopping, and in the past 3 weeks I've stopped every day, and I can't tell you exactly when that happened, except to say that it did, and I don't intend to go back." Lily sat with that for a moment, the weight of it and the simplicity of it together. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "I mean, yes," she said. "I mean, I'm in. I don't know what in looks like yet either, but I'm in it." He looked at her for a moment, and then something happened to his face that she'd been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. The full version of the expression she'd seen fragments of, the undefended version, the one that existed before all the management and distance and the 4 years of being excellent at things he could control. He looked, for one moment, like a person who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just set it down in a place where it would be safe, not fixed, not resolved, just set down. She reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly, and then moved it back, and they both looked at their plates, and the evening moved forward the way evenings did when you stopped trying to make them be something and let them be what they were. The investigation concluded formally in February. Victor Caldwell resigned from the Holloway board in November, quietly, through his lawyers, before the regulatory findings were officially published. The letter his attorneys released was 3 paragraphs and acknowledged nothing specifically, which everyone who read it understood to mean everything. The formal findings from the independent audit came out the following February, and they were thorough and damning in the particular bloodless language of regulatory documents. Phrases like systematic misrepresentation and undisclosed beneficial interests and conduct inconsistent with fiduciary responsibility that translated, for people who read them carefully, into the plain fact that Victor Caldwell had spent 4 years quietly steering a company's decisions for his own financial benefit while smiling across boardroom tables and using the word optics. Thomas Rady's witness statement became part of the official record. He gave a brief interview to a financial publication, which he'd apparently been waiting to give for 6 years, and he was precise and specific and said everything he needed to say without embellishment. Lily read it at her desk and thought about the 40-minute window between sending that email and getting his reply, and thought about the version of this story where she hadn't sent it, where she'd gone to bed at 11:40 and let the morning come without it. The Meridian contract went to Holloway Group in January. It was, by the company's financial team's assessment, the most significant contract the company had signed in its current form. Margaret Osei sent Ethan a 2-line email when the announcement was made. The second line was, "Clean house well." Gerald Park, at the first board meeting after Caldwell's departure, moved a formal motion to enter into the record a commendation for the thoroughness and professionalism of the internal evidence compilation that had initiated the investigation. He did not name Lily specifically in the motion. That wasn't how board motions worked, but he looked directly at her when he read it, and she held his gaze and nodded once. That was enough. Lily's employment status changed in December. Not dramatically, not with fanfare. Ethan brought it up in the same careful, practical way he brought up most things that were important to him, on a Tuesday afternoon when she was at her desk, and he'd stopped by in the now regular way. "I want to talk about your role," he said. "Okay." "Your role as currently structured was designed around a function that's changed," he said. "The company has changed. The way I work has changed. I think your title and compensation should reflect what you've actually been doing for the past several years rather than the job description from 2000 and..." He looked slightly pained by the math. "Whatever year it was." You want to redefine my position. I want to accurately define it. There's a difference. She looked at him for a moment. What does that mean practically? Senior Director of Strategic Operations, he said, with a compensation adjustment that's significant. He named a number. She absorbed it. And the writing, he said. I want to renegotiate your schedule to give you 2 mornings a week that are yours. Not mine, not the company's. She looked at him. You can't just give me mornings. I'm the CEO. I can adjust operational structures. I'm doing this because you've been doing this job at a level that warrants it. And I've been benefiting from your work at a rate that doesn't reflect its value, he said evenly. The writing mornings are separate. Those are because you told me in an elevator that you were afraid to write something, and I've watched you write it for 3 months, and it's important, and I want it to have space. She sat with that for a long time. Ethan, she said finally, She stopped, tried again. I don't need you to fix things for me. I know you don't need me to, he said. This isn't about need. It's about accurate recognition of what's actually there. He paused. You've been operating under a ceiling since I met you. I'd like to adjust that. She thought about the word ceiling. She'd used it herself, at dinner in the West Village, a ceiling when it should have been a floor. Okay, she said. Okay? Yes, she said. Thank you. He went back to his office. She sat at her desk and stared at her screen for a minute, and then she opened the manuscript document and added 2 sentences to the chapter she'd been working on, because that was apparently what she did now when something important happened. She wrote. November 14th came. Sophie's performance was in the school auditorium, which held maybe 200 people, and was full of parents and grandparents and younger siblings who couldn't quite sit still, and the particular anticipatory energy of a room full of people who were there because someone they loved was about to do something that mattered to them. Lily sat next to Ethan in the 7th row. Elena was on Lily's other side because Lily had asked if she wanted to come, and Elena had said yes with the speed of someone who had been waiting to be asked. And Sophie had been informed and had said yes, bring her with the same directness she deployed for everything. The performance was 45 minutes. Sophie's second act speech, the one about being brave in spite of fear, landed exactly as it had in the run-through, except louder and more certain, because she'd had 3 weeks to live with it, and she'd made it hers. The cardboard crown sat at the same slight angle. It had been repaired at some point. Lily could see where tape had been applied. And it didn't sit any straighter for the repair, but it stayed on, which was what mattered. When Sophie delivered the last line of her speech, she looked directly at the 7th row. Not at Ethan, at Lily. Lily wasn't expecting it. She had no time to prepare an expression or manage her reaction, which was probably the point, and her face did the thing that faces did when you were ambushed by something that went directly to the part of you that didn't have armor. She smiled, full and real and completely undefended. Sophie broke into a matching grin, just for a second, just for that moment, and then turned back to her scene with the professional commitment of a 7-year-old who had lines to deliver. Beside her, Ethan was very still. After the performance in the school hallway with students and parents moving around them in the particular chaos of a large group departure, Sophie found Lily first. She was still in costume, crown and all, holding a paper flower that another child had given her. Did you see the speech? She asked. I did, Lily said. You were excellent. I was brave, Sophie said, with the certainty of someone reporting a fact. You were brave, Lily agreed. Sophie looked at her with those pale green eyes. Are you coming to Christmas? She said. Lily blinked. Behind Sophie, Ethan made a face that was equal parts alarmed and resigned. Sophie, he said. I'm just asking, Sophie said without looking at him. She was still looking at Lily. We do a thing at the house. Dad makes pancakes. They're getting better. They're edible, Ethan said to Lily. That's the accurate claim. They're getting better, Sophie repeated firmly. She held out the paper flower to Lily. You can have this. Lily took it. It was slightly crumpled at one petal and had been colored with a yellow marker that had gone past the lines. It was exactly what it was, a 7-year-old's paper flower, given with the complete and uncomplicated generosity of someone who had decided she liked you and wanted you to know. Thank you, Lily said. So, are you coming? Lily looked at the flower. She looked at Sophie. She looked up at Ethan, who was watching her with the expression she'd come to know as his version of hope. Careful, restrained, but present underneath the restraint, like something unwilling to go all the way quiet. Yes, she said. I'm coming. Elena, who had been standing slightly to the side throughout this exchange, leaned toward Lily and said, in Spanish, quietly enough that it was mostly for Lily, I like this family. Lily looked at her mother. I know, she said. What happened after that happened slowly, the way real things did. Not in a single moment, not in a dramatic declaration, but in accumulation. Christmases and school events and Tuesday afternoons at her desk and dinners that stopped being notable because they became regular. Sophie learned to text Lily directly about things that were important to her, which was a list that included her opinions on various subjects, updates on the plant Lily eventually brought to the townhouse because Sophie had asked about it specifically, and periodic reviews of the chapters Lily let her read, edited for age appropriateness, from the manuscript that was becoming a book. Elena and Ethan developed a rapport that Lily had not anticipated, and that filled her with a complicated warmth. They found common ground in their shared assessment of Lily's stubbornness and their joint commitment to making sure she ate actual meals, and they communicated about this alliance in the way that people did when they'd decided to be on the same side of something. The book was finished in April, not April the following year, April 6 months after The Elevator. She'd been carrying it for 4 years and she finished it in 6 months, which she thought said something about the relationship between having something to say and having the space to say it. The way space changed things, not in a magical way, but in the ordinary, practical way of being able to breathe. She sent it to 3 agents on a Tuesday morning from her desk on the 32nd floor during one of the 2 mornings that were hers. She told Ethan when he stopped by that afternoon. 3? He said. To start, she said. What are you hoping for? She thought about what she'd said in the elevator the first time she'd described the book to someone who actually listened. Maybe someone who doesn't know that world will know it a little. Same thing I've always been hoping for, she said. He looked at her with that steady, undefended expression that she still wasn't entirely used to and probably wouldn't be for a long time, and said, It's going to find its readers. You haven't read it. I've read the chapters Sophie approved. A pause. You're a real writer, Lily. You've been one the whole time. You just needed to stop managing around it. She looked at her screen. She thought about the granola bars in her drawer. Still there, still a habit, probably always would be. She thought about the 2 sentences she'd written on the subway the night of the blackout, which had ended up in the book's 3rd chapter, cleaned up but recognizable. She thought about the specific quality of 7 hours in a freight elevator and how impossible it was, from the outside, to understand why that had mattered. The thing about invisibility was that you could live inside it for a long time and mistake it for safety. You could convince yourself that being unseen was the same as being protected, that if no one looked at you directly, no one could use what they saw. Lily had done this for most of her adult life, and she'd been very good at it, and it had served her mostly. She'd survived things that required not being seen. She'd navigated rooms and situations and the particular difficulty of being a person with less power than the people around her, and she'd done it by making herself essential while making herself small. The elevator had taken that away from her. 7 hours with nowhere to hide, and a man who had, slowly, imperfectly, in the particular halting way of someone relearning something they'd deliberately unlearned, turned toward her and looked. And she'd looked back. That was the whole of it, really. That was the unglamorous, uncinematic, entirely human core of it. 2 people in a difficult box, deciding to stop managing and start being honest. Everything that followed, the investigation, the boardroom, the dinner in the West Village, Sophie's paper flower, the book, was the accumulation of that one decision, repeated in different forms, held to across complications and uncertainties, and the ordinary friction of 2 imperfect people who were not easy and who had both spent considerable time convincing themselves they were fine alone. They were fine. They were also better together. Both things were true, and learning to hold both without letting one erase the other was the work of it, the ongoing daily work of it, and it was not always smooth, and it was not always comfortable, and there were days when old habits reasserted themselves. when she went quiet and internal in the way she did when something scared her, when he went distant and managed in the way he did when something felt like too much. And those days required patience and the willingness to say eventually what was actually happening. That was the part nobody talked about, the part after the significant moment, the part that was just regular life, with all its texture and inconvenience and the specific ordinary difficulty of choosing someone every day, not once but continuously, in the small ways that didn't make for dramatic stories but were the actual substance of a life built with another person. Ethan got better at stopping, at being in a room without managing it. He was not going to become a different kind of person. He was always going to be fundamentally contained, fundamentally private, fundamentally more comfortable with structure than without it. But within that, something had loosened. Sophie noticed it before Lily did, because Sophie noticed everything, and she said one evening at dinner, with her characteristic absence of filter, "Dad talks more now." "Is that good?" Ethan asked. Sophie considered. "It's different," she said. "I like it." Lily liked it too. She didn't say that. She didn't need to. He knew. The book sold that fall. Not immediately. There were rejections first, 2 of them, from agents who said kind things about the writing and honest things about the market, and she absorbed the rejections the way she absorbed most difficult things, by sitting with them briefly, letting them be what they were, and then putting them somewhere useful and continuing. The 3rd agent signed her in August, and the sale came in October, and she was at her kitchen table in Queens when she got the call, and her mother was in the other room with the television too loud. And she hung up the phone and sat there for a moment in the particular stunned quality of having something happen that you've been working toward for so long that the arrival of it felt unreal. She texted Ethan, 2 words, "It sold." His reply came back in 40 seconds. Also 2 words, "I know." She stared at the screen. "What do you mean you know? I called the agency last week." A pause. "I didn't tell anyone anything. I just wanted to know how it was progressing." She sat back in her chair. "Ethan." "I was thorough," he wrote. "You've mentioned that's a trait you appreciate." She put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and did the thing she'd been doing more often lately. She laughed. Not the small, involuntary exhale from the elevator. A real one, unguarded, in the kitchen where she'd grown up, while her mother watched television in the next room, and somewhere across the city a man who had walked past her desk for 3 years was probably sitting in his office with the expression she couldn't see but could perfectly imagine. She picked up the phone. "I'm telling you in person tomorrow." "I know," he wrote again. "Stop knowing things before I tell you. I can't help it. I'm observant." She recognized the word. Sophie's word and Sophie's voice, deployed by her father with the particular precise timing of someone who had been paying very close attention. She texted back, "I see where she gets it." She put the phone in her pocket and went to tell her mother, and Elena made a sound that was somewhere between a word and something that didn't need to be a word, and held her daughter's face in her hands briefly the way she'd done since Lily was small, and the television was too loud in the background, and the kitchen smelled like the cleaning product that was going to end up in the 3rd chapter of a book that people Lily had never met were eventually going to read in cities she'd never been to. She thought about what she'd said in the elevator. Maybe someone who doesn't know that world will know it a little, and maybe someone who does know it will feel a little less like it's invisible. That was still what she wanted. It was what she'd always wanted. And for the first time in her life, it wasn't enough to want it. She'd done the thing, page by page, in the hours she'd carved out of hard days, and now it was going to exist outside of her, and that was terrifying and correct, and exactly what it was supposed to be. On November 14th, 1 year to the day from Sophie's first real performance, the one with the repaired crown and the paper flower, Lily sat in the 7th row of the school auditorium and watched Sophie perform a different play in a different costume, with a crown that fit better this time, because Ethan had measured her head and ordered a real one, which was the most Ethan thing Lily had ever witnessed him do. Elena was on her left, Ethan was on her right. His hand was in hers, the way it had been increasingly often over the past year. Not dramatically, not as a statement, just as the ordinary physical fact of 2 people who had decided they didn't need to manage the distance between them anymore. Sophie delivered her climactic speech. She looked directly at the 7th row. at all three of them this time, her gaze moving across Elena, to Lily, to her father, and back, taking them in as a unit, as the specific configuration of people who had shown up for her, which was all any child really needed to know. Who was going to be there? Lily felt Ethan's hand tighten slightly around hers. She tightened back. Sophie finished her speech. The auditorium applauded. The crowd sat straight. Outside, November was doing what November did, cold and clear and bright in the way that had no warmth but made everything visible. And that was enough. That was exactly enough. Not as a ceiling, as a floor and everything built on top of it, and everything still to come.